Tim Nolte.
My name is Will Anderson. I'm with the CUD Association.
Yeah, welcome, Will. Will's the new executive director for the CUD Association.
And I'll be sure to make some comments at the end as well, but please proceed.
And Tim is with Mansfield Community Fiber.
We also have several folks attending virtually. We're not going to go through the roll call of all attending virtually, but we will have a public comment or public input at time certain 12:15 today. All right, with that, we are going to begin. The first item on the agenda is to check the agenda for requests and any vote to approve the agenda. Are there, first of all, any changes to the agenda? Laura.
Patty, if we have time, I'd like to add a question, some sort of discussion about how we can have maybe VQDA more present in these meetings. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I know that, some of that instant feedback, if it's possible, or, asking them to come back to us and, in a regular way. So just asking if we could discuss that at either in this meeting or at the next meeting.
Okay, let's add this to the agenda. If we get to it today, we'll take it up in terms of VQDA's involvement on our regular scheduled meetings. And if not, we will add it to the subsequent meeting.
Yeah, and I have a second and a third. So the second is when we get there, I'm going to ask that we actually not ratify the policies today and that we discuss them and specifically ask VQDA to come back to us as a group with recommendations on this. And the third would be with regard to the overarching standards. Again, talking about what is our way of getting some sort of formal so that there's more efficiency around feedback on these things. So is that with, asking VQDA to react to these standards or what, but just so that we're not trying to shuffle through.
Okay. So the two agenda items, ratification of policies and work on overarching standards, you would like to make some changes to those, but we can do that during those agenda items?
Yep.
So the only addition then to the agenda would be consideration of VQDA's role in our meetings on a regular basis.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, do I have a motion? To approve the agenda? So moved, second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, agenda is ratified and approved. First item on our agenda in terms of action is to approve two sets of minutes, one from August 26th meeting and the other from the September 2nd meeting. Do we have any discussion?
Yes, I don't have the August 26th ready for you today with Christine's input. So if we could postpone that to our next meeting.
Just the 26th?
Yes.
Okay. I am fine doing that. Is there any other discussion? $8:26, I'm just making some notes. Cool. Do I have a motion to approve September 2nd meeting minutes as presented in our board packets?
So moved.
Moved. Do I have a second? I'll second that. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the meeting minutes of September 2nd are approved. Meeting minutes of August 26, 2021, we will come back to. The next item on our agenda is ratification of policies. There were 8 policies in the board packet that were put forward. I'm going to start this by saying I am doing some catch up in terms of looking at past and other material that have been circulated. In review of the policies, I read these not necessarily as policies. Like some of them are more like operational directive stuff. They're not policy. I think of a policy as a broad, general, overarching statement. that gives us guidance to do X, Y, Z, or going some place forward. To me, these are less policy-y and more specific. So I wanted to have some discussion around that. And I know Laura brought up as far as agenda items, not taking action on the policies. But I think let's have some general discussion around the policies and just open it up. Holly?
So let me first start by saying I captured these in the context of our conversations 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so lest we start making commentary in the meetings that we're not tracking on what we've told the public, I think it's better to identify it as a standard. And so they may not be policies, but they may be standards. And I think it is important for the board to decide what its process is going to be when it's making decisions or providing guidance. So, you know, we have public meetings, people are commenting real time. It's been 2 meetings since that time. We have received some commentary. I'm worried, my only worry is that we try to clarify where we're at with regard to our intentions, and that we do that as quickly as possible because it has ramifications for everything we're doing. I do have, when we're ready, specific commentary or response to some of the comments that were provided by NEK, this NEK CUD.
My comments were not meant to
No.
be negative in terms of the work that you did in pulling these policies together. So first of all, I want to state that, be on the record, thank you. Because we are going at warp speed here. So intentionally, you know, just want to thank you and give you a shout out for that.
Yeah, no offense taken, but it is important that we not just make passing comments and then some people take that guidance and some people don't. It's
Agreed. Absolutely. So I just want to, as we roll up our sleeves, we're going to be clunky because we're going at warp speed and we are working and trying to get ourselves together, so to speak, in terms of organization at the same time. And that's very difficult. It's very difficult to set up policies while also trying to dig a ditch. It's, you know, that's basically what we're doing. We're in the weeds, and at the same time, we're trying to digest and read this 100 times, which is Act 71 that I'm holding up, and we're just not there yet. So just to everybody that's listening, you know, this is a work in progress, and appreciate your patience, and we will get through this and do it in a way that we come out in a good place. But at the same time, we're not going to hold things up. We want to move forward so that we can get processes in place and ultimately get grant dollars out the door. That's our overarching perspective on that.
So to that point, what should our process be with regard to making decisions not on grant applications, but rather on how we want to proceed and what our guidelines are? You know, like, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think, Holly, it's a great start. I think you've given us a great start. It's a flying start for us. I agree, policy feels like the wrong term, but I think the intent of what Holly documented is a great start.
Exactly.
So I don't know if we want to just.
There's some of these statements, by the way, that I don't particularly agree with.
Yeah, but that's part of the dialogue.
Yeah, exactly.
Fostering the dialogue, which is really helpful.
Exactly.
So, you know, I don't know if we want to call them guidelines or like so I think we should just come up with a term that is something less than policy, because policy feels too heavy.
Yeah.
And then describe how we intend to use these things, whatever we term them, because I'm sure we're going to add more as we go when we learn the obstacles that need to be removed and all those things. So I think it's a good, healthy start. Let's just name it and then have clarity as to how we expect these things to be used going forward.
What I would propose, I would like time to read these again and digest. Because as I was going
I'm not talking about the content of them, Pat, yet.
Agreed.
I'm just talking about like what are they and how do we expect them to be used? And then, because I want to get into the content discussion too,
Okay.
of what these things are.
Maybe their goals, guidelines.
I think they may be guidelines.
The word that I want to use to frame this is that it has the ability to change. That they're not, you know, this is not entrenched. We can, on the fly, we can change these.
Gotta be flexible.
Exactly. So if guidelines hits that,
So like, just take the first one. I'm not gonna get into the content, but just as an example. The first one is a commitment we're making as the board that we will provide, make certain data available.
mhm,
And we expect that data to be incorporated and used by anyone who's going to be submitting an application to us, right? That's effectively what that thing is.
Actually, I heard the intention of the board a little differently on this first guideline.
Mhm.
How are we setting our baseline? So yes, we're beholden to serve a number of unserved and underserved locations. And how shall we know what they are? Yeah. And then this to me says that in the conversation that I was recalling was that there's locations identified by the DPS. I think the statute assumes that we're going to follow DPS location reporting. And that we asked that we compare those to what the locations are for the CUDs, and that we report the RDOF locations separately. You know, not just roll all locations reported by the DPS into one. And then separately, there was the question of what do we do about the fact that there's about to be new DPS data.
Right. Right, so that's to me, but the guideline we're giving is that we're gonna manage all of that.
Right.
Or we're gonna cause it to be managed. We may not manage it, but we're gonna cause it to be managed so that there is a single baseline off of which the people that are gonna be generating applications will work
Right.
off of to provide us the data about what their work's gonna do and who it's going to affect, right? That's the high level. And I think that's a important and meaningful guideline for this board that says we're going to, and we've got a GIS resource budgeted to help us do this, right? But we're going to cause those numbers, reconciling RDOF and all the complexity Holly just said, we're going to cause that to be an available baseline for CUD or even public consumption. That's what this guideline says to me.
And if the typographical error in the last sentence were corrected to say the board shall publish its baseline location count by district, that's pretty much what the guideline is.
There is one other, the new public service department data will be the 2020 data, not the 2021 data.
So that's the, and that's
It could even just be the
flexible
latest
thing, right,
data.
where it's going to get updated periodically because as more and better data becomes available, we're going to want to incorporate that.
So,
Oh, are we though? Because I think that's some part
yeah,
of the
that's a
question.
discussion.
We don't want the baseline to move.
Well, the baseline is for tracking progress, not necessary for allocating funds. It's just showing how far we've come since we've begun, correct?
yeah, but I think the point is to measure how far you've come, you've got to set a
Stop.
fixed
Yes.
baseline.
Right, but the
So that you
baseline
can
is
measure it
there's
against.
a temporal element to this thing, which is at this point in time, this is the baseline. 12 months from now, that baseline will have changed due to the activity on the ground, and we'll have a different snapshot of that. And that's the progress of that 12-month period, right? That's
I don't think you'd call it baseline. though.
okay. So whatever term we want to
Okay.
use.
Progress, great.
Yeah, progress.
Mhm.
You're redirecting your efforts to whatever is left over, always redirecting to whatever's left over.
But at the highest level, this guideline is saying we're going to cause this type of data to be available. I mean, it's simple. I can't say it more simply than that. And that's exactly what Holly's captured. And she talked about it's not easy. It's complicated. You got a bunch of, not competing, you got a bunch of moving parts in here that are going to affect the calculation of the baseline. But that's one of our obligations, right?
Mhm.
Just, if I may, do we envision creating board policies? Or will we, because this is going to move fast and I feel that it should be fluid because we're going to learn and adjust continuously. And I just feel creating guidelines and working with those is good, but do we ever envision actually creating policy?
In the event we do create a policy, Act 71 should be our construct to do that. And Holly, I apologize. I am trying to keep up to speed with like both regular work and this work at the same time, and it's clunky to say the least. I finally got to the matrix,
Mhm.
which is super handy. So
I
There's,
haven't circulated that generally.
so there's, what I'd like to do is spend more time with it. It's just, I'm time constrained right now, time constrained. But in the event we have policies, I want it to be framed on Act 71 and the purposes laid out in Act 71. And the policies should be driven by that. And we can, if I can spend a little bit more time on that matrix and give some, maybe we go back and forth on it and share that with the group, and that can help us. But we can be short and sweet with the purposes outlined in Act 71 and let that guide us for some policy statements and not get bogged down too much in that.
Great. And so whoever the attorney is that comes on board can take that, translate it, and formulate it into policies, and that's a piece of work that's done. We acknowledge that, and then we focus
Yes.
our energies on the guidelines. Okay. Thank you. I was just.
In this particular guideline, I think is a little bit useful because it helps staff, it helps the CUDs, helps us. And it does say that we will incorporate DPS data, it reinforces the statute.
Yeah, I would add too that this is very helpful for staff, because getting, clear direction and having those action items it helps us a lot.
Okay.
I think, and I just want to go back to what we call this. And I'm really good with the word guidelines as a short, but I'd like to call it work practice guidelines. We can use shorthand guidelines, but I just wanted this to be clear that this is, it's not a directive. If you guys discover something, if staff discovers something in the process, they're like, oh, that doesn't fit.
They should bring it back.
Yeah,
Yes, but it's, when you say something as a work practice guidelines, that takes a very different connotation, even compared to just guidelines. In my head. I don't know if it's.
And I actually, I really kind of don't care what we call them.
Okay.
I'm okay with them being called policies even.
That word policies makes people squirm.
Yeah, that's fine, but I think what they actually are understandings between points of clarity between the board, the staff, and the CUDs, who we are, the board and staff are, here to make sure are moving forward and completing this historic mission that, Team Vermont, we're all part of Team Vermont on this, right? So
Yeah.
Understandings, which is, again, why I think it would be helpful for us. We don't have to accept, we can certainly push back, but I think it's important for us to take these and in the most efficient way possible. And any delay will only, stress out the CUDs themselves, ask BQ to, here are understandings that we want to make sure exist between us and the staff and, do you have any feedback? And, we're taking it up and we're going to move forward with these at the next meeting, but asking them specifically, and I think the value of that understanding helps us all stay together at this warp speed that we're all trying to move at.
Now, in deference to the fact that NEK bothered to write some comments on these guidelines, I did want to acknowledge those, which is very helpful. And one of the things that got mentioned in the context of those comments is this question about RDOF and what to do with RDOF sites.
Yeah.
To me, that's not part of these guidelines. That's like, are we going to adopt an RDOF practice? And I think it really comes into play when we talk about construction grants. And, yes, it has to do with our site count, perhaps our baseline, because we have to know what to do with those RDOF sites. The suggestion from NEK is that we get written agreements for service. I don't think that we're going to affect the federal award process in that way. But I think we need to know of the baseline count, how many of those are RDOF.
Yes, and I think we need to know that RDOF is not a promise, which I think they, NEK put forward pretty eloquently. Like it's an award and it may never get built, or it may never get built to the standard. It may never happen. And the CUDs on the ground have to really, again, I'd like some feedback from them. I appreciate, that NEK took time to do this. How do we deal with these? Because we could be setting up really expensive pockets within these CUDs if we completely ignore them or isolate them, so I think it's an important question.
But I think on this one, so this is going to be derived from the GIS data. In the GIS data, we should have the RDOF census blocks and the locations in those blocks that, again, no judgment on whether RDOF's going to deliver or not deliver. We just tag it so that we know that, that location is part of an RDOF census block, and we have that context as we move forward in our process.
And all that data is on the Public Service Department website in GIS form, as well as a
Yeah,
spreadsheet.
we have the
So we have that data.
Already there.
Patty, I would just bring up one other issue with regards to policies. And this was something that I think we all got from DV Fiber, which was, in addition to Act 71, Act 79 created these CUDs, which is who we are now trying to support. And so I think it's important for all of us to keep that in mind as well.
So in addition to Act 71, I would encourage everyone to read Act 79 and also Act 169. Those are two other guiding legislative position statements, or not position statements, laws that we need to adhere to.
Maria Royale's testimony to the Joint Information Tech Committee, is that what it's called?
technology operation, JICA.
Does do a nice outline of pertinent laws too.
Okay.
Just if you want to listen to something. All this conversation, that's a great comment. All this conversation about RDOF though is sort of begging this question of, are we going to, when we set what the goal is and we count the locations, what are we going to do about the RDOF, RDOF census blocks? It's not clear that we should, the department would say there's a plan for those. I don't feel comfortable saying there's especially given the number that are assigned to Starlink, or I don't feel comfortable with saying that there's a plan for that. But I think we ought to say how we're going to address it.
Just to put out there, Starlink wasn't included in the planned addresses. We're just looking at wired projects in the DPS
How
data.
can they make that discernment?
Yeah. So this is where
Let me add one more thing too, because the thing about RDOF is, you've got a really poor business case in these areas, which is less than 9 passings per mile.
Yeah.
And only about 20% of the funds come from RDOF. So it's still a bad business case, which is why I think NEK raised the issue is like, they may still walk away from those RDOF blocks to say it's not worth it.
Yeah, I don't think we're in any position to make judgments on RDOF today. I think we identified that we need to have an RDOF discussion. We need to bring in the right RDOF experts who can explain what it is and what it isn't, where the opportunity lies and where the exposures lie. And then once we have that informative discussion among us, then we can take on how do we allow that to affect the baseline data and how we view the RDOF locations in the context of a grant application.
That's exactly right. And so for the listening public, it's important for them to know that this is still an open area.
Sure, absolutely.
That it would be of interest to me to know whoever the person is that's making the determination in the department, how they're deciding what they're doing with RDOF information, because that's the information we're going to receive. And so it just would be.
Yeah, I mean, there's RDOF information awards, places that have been awarded that, so how are the CUDs handling it? So are they, do they view these addresses
Well,
in
I
their
think that's
district?
a separate question.
Well, for me, I would say we should be keeping track of all of the addresses that have an RDOF award, period, along with a CUD. I'd like to see what the DPS says, what the CUD says, and what the RDOF award is, straight, period, as a next set of information. I think that would help inform our discussions and maybe have some feedback from.
And we might not get to that until we have a GIS person or contract.
So just a clarifying question, and maybe the dots have not connected yet in my head. Folks that have RDOF accountability, so they're going to get, I call it the 10% off coupon, not even 20%, but they're getting like 10% toward their project costs. And like you said, they may not move forward with that because it's not enough. They're not precluded from also getting grant dollars from VCBB, correct? They can get both. They can get RDOF funds and they can get VCBB
If they
funds.
qualify as an eligible carrier or a CUD.
So that's, assuming that's a CUD
I
coming
think there's
in
only one
that's doing
that
both.
falls into that category.
Well, no, so I would say
And
that
K-
any CUD could be working with an
Right.
RDOF
Oh, could be
awardee.
working with, yes.
They could be
Yeah.
working with an RDOF awardee to cover the cost of that.
Right, so
But
they're
versus they
subcontracting,
are.
they're,
RDOF awardees, yeah.
right, they're getting the award, but they're giving it to somebody. And many of those entities are going to be folks that have also bid into RDOF auctions.
Yeah.
So they're gonna get some, they being this subcontractor essentially is gonna get some money from RDOF. They're also gonna get some money from the CUD through us. That should be part of the whole picture for them in order to make this a go, because a 10% off coupon is not gonna motivate me to go spend billions of dollars necessarily. But if I've got a 35% off coupon or 45% or some bigger number, that's going to affect change. So we're not cutting out RDOF folks from our grants. It's part of the puzzle. It's a pancaking and layering of a series of grant opportunities.
So I think the next step is, so we're all speculating here.
Yeah.
And so I would propose, and I'm throwing this out as a question, is the department the right body or expert to come in and give us the RDOF primer on what it is and what it is not? Or do we need a different expert to come in and give us that? I don't know the answer to that. I know the department has looked at this a lot, but I don't know if that's the source of RDOF.
It might be appropriate to get FCC counsel to come in, and I think there's people who would volunteer to do that for us.
Okay.
Yeah, I think maybe you can phrase this as who is the expert, and turn it over to staff and we'll research that. and
But I,
correct it.
but I think the real problem is, and I might take that back that I just said, because it's not that we want a primer on RDOF, it's that we want to know what is the status of those locations, but also does RDOF require that they serve them? And I think that's really where we need to be focused.
Well, two things. First, one of the challenges with just having an FCC lawyer is the department went through matching those locations, the census blocks, with E911 locations, which is our baseline for data. So the numbers the numbers the FCC provides aren't going to match up to what the reality is on the ground in Vermont.
Right.
The second thought was, if we want to know what the status of these builds are, if they're going forward and all of that information, maybe I think it's 4 different winners in Vermont have won census blocks. Maybe we should hear from them and find out what their plans are, if it is going to be within the context. It's just, I'm just throwing out ideas.
Yeah, when you can get a phone call back from Starlink, let me know.
Well, I think maybe we do need to make a decision of whether we are counting or only counted wired locations.
That is one of the guidances down the road.
Mhm.
So I heard that we should have a discussion on this that maybe is department driven, like how their data goes. And that this guidance is really about creating a baseline. And we need to figure out the RDOF piece before we can really say how we're creating that baseline. And the baseline has to be acknowledge where the CUDs, how the CUDs are counting locations, and figure out if there's a difference between how the department counts locations and how because we need to account for that difference.
Yeah.
And it might be that the difference is that it's not grid addresses. I mean, it could be that the difference is that the E911 addresses aren't clear. There's so many data-driven reasons, right?
Yeah, but I just don't want to get into a position. I think our position is we're using the DPS data as a starting point, and we're going to create a baseline that we make available to everyone. If people want to give us feedback on whether that's the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do, or what other considerations we need to take while doing that, that's what I'm interested in. I don't have any interest in saying, here's what we have, what do you have, let's do the difference. We're going to create a source of truth. That's the baseline for all of our activity. And we want feedback while we do that so that we get it as right as we can. But if we get into this competing, our data says this, your data says that, I'm out. Like, that's just.
We'll never get done.
We'll never get anything done. We'll just argue about data.
It's too complicated.
Yeah, you argue about data the whole time. So that's, Rob, I can't see your face, but I can feel your body language that.
Oh, no, I'm on board. I'm on board with that. And I feel that if the CUDs are using a different number set, they need to justify it.
They just need to.
That's all. Tell us why.
So my expectation is they're going to use our numbers,
Yes.
data set. And if there's a problem with that, they're going to tell us what it is, and we're going to factor that into our data set if we buy into it, so that we continue to have one source of truth. That's multiple sources of truth. We
Very good
are
idea.
we are going to lose steam quickly.
And recreating the data wheel is a long, long path to
It's just-
getting
it doesn't
anything
make any
done.
sense. And so again, in that source of truth, all I care about right now is like, remember, RDOF doesn't talk about locations. It talks about census blocks, which are geographic areas. There are locations inside of those geographic areas that are presumed to be covered by the awarding of that census block. So the GIS data should just simply identify, and I know this can be done if it hasn't been done already. It knows where the census blocks are, and then it can look at what are the E911 locations in those census blocks, and it's just a layer that says, by the way, these locations in Vermont fall within RDOF census blocks, and then it'll identify the awardee of that census block, so that we can then look at, all right, what's your project? What's the time frame? Has it been done? Is it complete? Is it in process? Is it still on the drawing board? And what's the likelihood that it'll ever get built? And what's the technology?
And your description earlier, the pancaking effect, a good GIS analyst will be able to apply. Now, where you're giving this much money, well, these addresses have the pancaking effect that stack this high, and these have it this high, and you can do the math right in the tool.
It's just layers.
It's just layers, and sticking with a baseline and informing it as we learn more. I mean, people are putting fiber out right now, so there are areas that we may be pulling out as we go. And just don't need to do construction in those areas. The CUDs doesn't do that. I feel strongly that we don't need to duplicate what's already there. So that tool.
Good point.
In terms
Very
of
good point.
RDOF,
In terms, if there's a carrier that's putting fiber to a home
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
We don't need to award, in my opinion, a
Yeah.
CUD money to overbuild that infrastructure to compete with them. Use those dollars to reach the furthest homes that have nothing, and redirect that money to get to the really unserved areas.
And the statute has a standard for what it takes to overbuild incidental to
yeah,
the overall project plan.
So if you have it, well, that's, I think it's worth discussing. If you have a territory that there's a carrier that's clearly going to build to every home, do we award a CUD money to build to every home in that territory?
Can I
So-
suggest that we need to have a discussion about guidance on overbuilds and get into this? I think that that's like another one to add to our list.
Yeah, and I view that as showing up in the grant application scoring.
Yeah.
Right, because if you have a project that's got a ton of overbuilding going on over existing capacity, like, why?
Yeah.
For what purpose? It's also gonna get into the affordability discussion at some point, because just because a carrier is there doesn't mean it's an affordable retail offering, right? And so we're gonna have to get into that.
So to be clear, I don't think we're going to be
see the
picking
panic
addresses.
on my face.
Yeah, it's,
I don't think
Yeah.
we should be picking addresses because I don't think we can, but in the matrix of what our values are, or how we choose, that's a factor, as Brian was describing. If you're overbuilding 90% of your territory, well, what are we achieving
you're
here?
accomplishing.
Yeah, what are you accomplishing? Are you really accomplishing the unserved, or are you just seeking to compete head to head? And I think it's a factor in the decision making, not choosing addresses, because I think that's what your face said.
I'm going to encourage any CUDs that have a thought on this to bring that out in the public comment period, because if you're planning stuff now, if you're doing work now in anticipation that you're going to get a grant from VCBB, you'd want to know that, because there are folks that are already rolling, and their business model may be they have a placeholder for grants coming from us, but they could be checked off on the list as they're already building. Does that make sense?
Scorecard for where the various CUDs are, like we've talked about in the last two meetings. on staff?
It hasn't been updated. I'm actually preparing a survey that I'll be sending out to all the CUDs that mirrors the information we're asking in the pre-construction grant, since they don't have to do it twice. That'll be able to be used to make a scorecard that'll be easily updated. It takes into account not just what was in that previous spreadsheet, but also measures of capacity. I did want to throw one other complication in there. Is a lot is happening in between these data updates from the Public Service Department. And how do we want to deal with that? Do we want to seek out getting data on like what an incumbent telephone company has built out in terms of fiber since the start of the year? Anything that's been built in 2021 will not be reflected in this data that's going to come in October. How do we want to deal with that? And I think that's just another issue we'll have to address.
Before we leave this topic, the panic on my face is we've had a donut holing strategy by the private providers that has gotten us into this mess. And so it is impossible for the CUDs, and I know you know this, so I think I'm not understanding 100% where you're at. It is impossible for the CUDs to build to the unserved and underserved, the addresses that cost the most, without overbuilding these private providers who could not make the investment to get there. I mean, we have to overbuild them.
But that's
At
the,
some
that's
in
the
some
incidental
locations.
part.
Yes.
There's provision for that.
Yes.
That's a good point.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah, there's gonna be.
It's
some
not black and
overlap.
white.
If however, you're overbuilding so that you can get a core aggregate of households
It's a
or
losing strategy
consumers.
with most of these existing providers because, you know, your
Yeah.
Comcast, your Consolidateds have the ability to drop the price.
Right.
So,
That's the challenge.
Okay,
All right, so that started off as a, should we call these guidelines discussion? right?
well, we haven't done guideline number 2.
No,
Yeah.
but remember, the first thing was, what are these? And we weren't even talking about content, right? We built into content on one as we tried to use it as an example, which is fine. So do we want to continue to get into additional content, or do we, I mean,
So that we can, so that we can have conversation, then we then come back and formulate, because I'm not even sure where we left off at number 1,
Yeah.
if we had a content discussion, because we're a little bit unclear of how, I mean, we're going to identify RDOF locations. I think it's a factor in funding, but I don't think it
needs to be in the baseline?
needs to be in the
That's all
baseline.
I'm saying, because it's
Yeah.
going to inform our thinking and our
Yeah.
discussion, so it
Yeah.
needs to be in the baseline.
That's it.
And
But what if let me throw this proposal out, and I want to lean on Rob and Christine here, is to come back with this list of guidelines and frame it a little differently so we can have some more substantive discussion. Yeah. And rather than us do it now, because we would spend the entire meeting just dealing with this.
Yeah.
And I just don't want to lose sight of these, but I also don't want it to take the entire meeting time. So Christina, Rob, let's talk after this in terms of, I want to give you some thoughts of what I have in mind. It's totally going to be your job to do it. But, you know, just I'm putting my analyst hat on. I'm a very logical, linear thinking type of person. I'd want a name for the guideline that maybe the first guideline is baseline data. And then underneath that baseline data, some criteria you're going to use to come up with baseline data. You like bullet points, I like bullet points too. So make it less wordy, more
dots, or do you like stars or hyphens?
dots or hyphens.
I like that.
But just,
Can we get those little cubes?
Little smiley face?
I do
So-
think this is valuable, this has been a valuable discussion.
right, but just to give you some idea of what we're thinking, but I want this to be coming from staff, because these are guidelines with which you are going to work from. They're not, you know, it's not the 10 Commandments. It's, you know, some work boundaries, so to speak. So what I'd like to do is get for each one of these, what is the nugget that it's trying to deal with? And then underneath that nugget, some bullet points to lay that out. So Laura first, and then we'll go to Holly.
Okay, and so Patty, is it your intention that before we get that back, that the CUDs would also have an opportunity to comment, or would it come to us and then we would ask them to comment and then we would?
I have no objection to hearing their comments on what we have so far.
Yeah.
Let them understand that these are going to look completely different.
Yeah.
And they can choose to hold their comments and wait to see what we come back with, but they've got something on the paper that they can react to. So I'm going to leave it to the CUDs to express thoughts.
Okay, and I would encourage that they express those thoughts before our next meeting, if at all possible, so that we can get to a place where we put this down, knowing, of course, that we can always come back and revisit something, but so that we can get past
This is in a Word file that can be edited on the fly as we go. This is not the 10 Commandments set in a stone that can never be modified.
Okay with that, Rob?
So that's a great idea, but I think it's got to be said that the board has to make some of these decisions.
Agreed.
And it has to make decisions,
Agreed.
and they've got to be clear enough to be applied. And so they can evolve, but they have to be clear directives.
I agree, very
Okay.
much so. Once we get to, yep, these look good, we're gonna ratify them, go, but it doesn't mean that they're set and they can't be modified on the fly as we move on. For
Right.
good reason, we'll change them.
And so just among my colleagues here, as we make comments, and some of them really, will come up organically, like there shouldn't be overbills or whatever. We need to have a methodology to parking lot, that as a concept that we need to discuss, and we need to track it, and we need to come back to the meeting with the right information to make, because we have to.
Because there were just 6 heart attacks.
Yeah, well, there's the heart attack
There
factor,
we go.
then there's the, are we all on the same page
Right.
question?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
This would be really helpful for me, is to have a large sheet of paper that we call parking lot issues. And then every meeting, we bring the parking lot issue, put it on the wall, and we can see what we have left to deal with, or we just keep adding to it, just to keep that constant reminder of what's in the parking lot. Exactly.
Yes, we do.
And I can't keep, I'm going to be just, blunt in my own lack of organization. I'm looking back at minutes that I've taken on the back of board packets. We're all trying to get our feet grounded here. So as we get a little more organized and a little more together, and as new staff are coming on, we're going to be able to do more. But I just think that would be helpful. Put it on the whiteboard, but then you erase it and it goes away. Just have a large piece of paper, and we'll bring it to the board.
So we also include that as a part of the minutes each week as well.
A list of parking lot issues. I
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
so
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
flip chart and.
Yeah.
I like that. That's great.
So I would normally volunteer to be who would do that, but I have many skills. Handwriting is not, penmanship is not one of them. I can certainly attempt to write on it, but I wouldn't expect anybody
We
to.
could use a board like this. if
That's
you
what I
have-
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah, and our goal, we will have the administrative
Board
help
minutes,
short.
Let's just capture
You
it
know,
digitally
yes.
so that
So that,
handwriting these days,
Yeah.
except for personal use, makes no sense in terms of information sharing.
Right, can we, just because I'm a visual person, let's do a parking lot today. I'm happy to be the writer, or Laura, since you're just close to it, would you be okay?
Happy to be the writer.
And then
Tell me what you want.
at the end of the meeting, these will be put into the minutes, and the parking lot will always be part of the minutes. This is our list of parking lot issues.
Yep.
And the parking lot can move from, here's the list, items as they are done, they
Oh
come
my
out of the
goodness,
parking
look at
lot.
that handwriting.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's out. Overbill.
Yeah.
What else is up?
we have also wanted to capture concepts that will be discussed at later meetings.
That's really what the parking lot is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so.
I guess I interpret that
Fair enough,
differently.
thank you,
I
thank
think-
you.
I think
Fair
I'm thinking, if something's going to be a guideline at some point, but we were not ready to discuss it, we want to capture that.
Right there.
In the parking lot.
Yeah, okay, so I guess maybe.
It's just so that we don't lose sight of things that we said, oh, we wanted to talk about that.
Yeah.
And just because,
Yeah, okay, got it.
So the other thing, staff is gonna take this concept of baseline, put some language, some bullet points around it, so that we can look at it and see if it fits the mark, right?
so policies, I'd put in quote, to guidelines. Arrow guidelines. And then we'll talk about that after this meeting a little bit more.
And then we're also gonna invite an RDOF, someone with RDOF insights to come talk to us about, what it is not, so that we have that knowledge, right?
Thank you. as long as we're doing it like this.
Yeah, it was either the department or, they suggested an
Yep.
FCC attorney, but I think it's.
I think the
I think
department
it's
can do
something
it.
local, yeah.
Yeah.
I can see Clay or Corey being able to do that
Yeah.
pretty straightforward.
Thank you.
So,
Okay.
so one of the reasons why it's really important that we get these down though is like, for example, there's a conversation in the NHA comments about whether or not the date in the legislation, June 1, 2021 is arbitrary. And it may be arbitrary, it may not be arbitrary, but in fact, it's in the legislation and there's rules of interpretation here that suggest that a specific date should be followed in legislation. And we've talked about this now 3 times. So what I'm hoping we can do through this process is get it down and close the door on that conversation so that we're not cycling.
Tell me again, this is the issue of guideline
This
4?
is labeled as policy number 4. And this is where we said, are the towns the ones in the CUDs as
of June 21, June 1.
June 1, 2021? Or is it, are we morphing CUDs as towns come and go?
June 1, I can tell you what June 1 is. June 1 is it's an eligibility deadline for towns that are going on their own. That's what it was intended for. So that you don't have, when we included small providers as being, eligible for this, that they were not then going to CUDs and dismantling them and encouraging them to leave the CUD. So if you're part of a CUD and you're leaving a CUD, to go work one-on-one with a provider, that is not eligible at June 1st. That's what that was for.
Unfortunately, it doesn't say that, but I
Yeah.
take your advice on that. So, but how does that change how we look at June 1st?
So I think the question here is around how grant funds are allocated, and we talked about Waterbury last time.
Yeah.
Right.
And so Waterbury in, Waterbury out.
Yeah.
And we said Waterbury out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think we want to do anything that's going to discourage CUDs from accepting new towns.
Right.
I think that's the challenge here in finding the balancing act, but dealing with a limited amount of funds. So I don't know if it's something that we update quarterly or something. We should have some type of schedule, perhaps.
So I think what I heard was we're not updating. So this is my mind. I'm trying in a sea of information to create some finite guidelines. Like this is the number of locations per CUD. And a CUD can add a town, but on June 1st, there was a certain number of locations in that CUD. And that's how we're looking at what a universal service plan looks like for funding purposes. And I think we do want to know how they're addressing additional towns, and they might apply for money for additional towns. But how do you start making some sort of rational, methodical plan out of this? I think I took the wisdom of the legislation to be, we know you need to put a stake in the ground, so here's the stake.
And there's not a lot of June 1st towns, actually, right? So that might be another thing for us to understand from the CUDs.
Post June 1st towns.
Yeah.
I don't expect there to be a lot of expansion. And if we break it down to the amount of money per address we're allocating, that could be one approach. It's not going to change formulas all that much.
That's what you've said all along.
But I think
that
it's
helped.
still important for them to. I'm just worried about the incentive factor.
But this is the conversation to the word that we've had twice. And I'm just trying to say, okay, and I am offering this so that you all on staff in making these guidelines know what we're trying to do is to just, put some benchmarks in so that we can operate within a context. If we find out that it causes us to do unnatural acts, we can modify the guideline. Yeah, but anyway. Well, I think ultimate fluidity here in the name of being, I don't think it discourages anybody from doing the right thing. And in fact, CUDs might merge, but they would still be whatever they were on June 1st.
Yeah, let me add something too. I think we do, well, we haven't discussed this, so we might disagree. But I actually think this is workable because when it comes to the grant application, that can be written into the grant application. I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on that. So okay, we have a guideline here, but someone gets a town, for example, in Lamoille, Lowcut is a member of NEK and Lamoille Fiber. So ultimately, when the grant application comes in, we can make those decisions. Is that a workable answer?
I think it's a workable answer, but I think it speaks to the larger question of how we are going to allocate funds for construction in general, which may take not just one meeting, but several to figure out. So maybe it's not an issue at this point, since it's the pre-construction, we have a set amount now, we can address that, we have the power to change that as necessary. We want to keep it pretty close, and we know the number of addresses. If one or two towns join or switch, it's not going to shift. We're talking thousands, not a few $1,000s. We're not talking a few $1 million in shifting. So one other approach could be of that, okay, allocations stay the same unless there's a 2% change or a 5% change in the number of addresses in the district. Or we can just deal with this when we're figuring out the construction, because we may not go by the number of unserved addresses when we figure out how we're allocating construction funding. It might have to do with road miles of the network that needs to be built. There's a lot of different factors, and we'll know more when we have a GIS person.
That's another question that I didn't ask at the agenda, changes to the agenda, which is, an update on staffing. So unfortunately, and I would love to hear that, just kind of, even if we get that report, when we do get that reported, but
yeah, I'll include
just
that.
how close
I'll
we are.
include it in the
Yeah.
weekly report.
Yeah.
So,
All right, so we don't have resolution on this, so I'm gonna put this in the parking lot,
Which
the June
1st.
1st, June 1, 2021 date. Whether the allocation, and that refers to the formulas and allocation of dollars. If that changes, we need to nail this down and just need to make a decision on it. Because as Holly said, we've talked about it several times.
Didn't we make a decision not to include Waterbury?
Well, except we shouldn't make a decision based on a town. We should make a decision based on.
Right, but I think
A
we did make a
practice.
decision not to.
This is just for pre-construction loan, right? So far,
I thought it was
everything.
everything.
It
But
was allocation of funds, right?
It was
All
allocation
funds?
of funds for the broadband pre-construction. I don't think we have a consensus for the construction of whether we're even using addresses. And so, like in the case of Waterbury, it was a rounding. I rounded it. It didn't make any difference. And that's going to be the case in most towns.
Right, that's what drove the discussion, because
Yeah.
you said it was a rounding error, so because of that, it was such a minuscule impact. We said just as of June 1st, 2021, for the pre-construction
and if we
dollars
do
that are
cons-
rolling out.
And if we do construction based on mileage, well, that doesn't affect our decision of June 1st towns and locations.
Can is the board okay with specifying this June 1, 2021 date for formulation and allocation of construction funds? Not the pre-construction dollars, but construction funds.
No. But unless I'm understanding it wrong. So I'm fine with June 1st for pre-construction. I'm using that exact same methodology for construction.
For construction as well. You wouldn't change it.
What?
You would not change it for construction dollars.
We would.
I would like. to
Yeah, I
have the
would
discussion.
That's
rather
what-
make a decision.
Right, we've already made a decision
For pre-construction.
for pre-construction.
Oh, great.
So that's off the table. That we revisit this only relative to, we're only going to change the formula for the construction dollars. We're gonna have a discussion
Or
about
talk
that.
about it.
Talk about it.
Yep.
But the pre-construction dollars is,
That's out there right now we can address it another time if we feel there's a need to readdress it or for petition to readdress it, for instance.
we're all on the same page. We're actually saying the same thing.
Yeah, but just to project ahead, like, I don't expect a CUD to make an application for construction costs for the entire territory all at once.
Right.
I expect it to be a series of projects with a series of applications for each build segment, right?
Yeah, that's,
And
but
finance.
don't make a decision on that, because I think there's some flaws in that statement. And I think we'll need to talk about that later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a
And I
good
just want to
discussion.
put an asterisk.
They made flaws we accept.
Okay.
That whether or not you do project by project financing, it should all be subject to a universal service plan that considers the number of towns and the locations within those towns.
Sure, sure. But in terms of the awarding of funding and how we do it,
Yeah, it's all subject to a plan and a business plan.
Okay.
And that's actually why I care so much, is that we're saying that this pre-construction phase, some of the CUDs are done actually with operational agreements and business planning, and yet I'm wondering, done with what? Because until we say, these are your locations, we agree, right? And these are your towns, we agree, right? What have they planned for?
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
to me, the baseline, I want the baseline
Act
data,
79.
I want it yesterday, so we can have intelligent conversations where they challenge us back or we challenge them, and we try to settle on what's in the field today and what's the gap and what's the plan to address the gap. That's,
And there's the universal service.
Well, and
Which-
Act 79 is a key part of this, because Act 79 told them what to plan for.
And there's a previous
So is
action
this-
item.
yeah.
There's a previous parking lot item that we have, which is to bring in those business plans to the board, and I'm not sure how we'll do that.
I'm waiting for them to be part of the dashboard, but they need to be reviewed, yeah.
Should that be in the parking lot?
What?
Bring in
The business plan.
Bring in
Business plans and the dashboard.
So the question with the business plans is, often the business plans contain a model that's considered confidential and proprietary. So if we're going to be reviewing actual business plans, it may require an executive session for some elements.
Because it contains commercial partners' data.
Can they redact?
They can redact as well. The other way, we can use their.
I mean, I want to be careful what we think is confidential here, right?
So they are acting as, they have competitors.
Well, they do, but they're also municipalities.
That's right. There's a tension there. So what are we putting up here?
Through redaction or executive session, right?
Business plans and
CUD business
Plans
plans.
and the dashboard.
the dashboard.
And this might be something we want to wait till we have an attorney on staff that
Yeah.
can advise us.
Although,
I know.
Well, we can solve that problem in the near term. Anyway, that's a staffing discussion. Okay,
Okay, so are we done for now with our guidelines?
You still have 7 minutes.
In place of that 7 minutes and before our break, what I'd
so,
like to do is ask for Christine to do an update on staff.
and I just alerted staff that I'll send you comments on the NK comments that you can consider as you're making your guidelines, your guideline outlines.
But we should wait till the next meeting. We shouldn't be hitting reply all.
That's right.
yeah, but my understanding from what Patty said is that you all will synthesize input. What your need, you'll start with your needs, synthesize input. Hopefully they will also come from BQTA as well as board members and bring something
Yep,
back
that's
for us to work to.
To our original missive, and that you're not creating these guidelines and then circulating them for additional comment before we comment here at our next meeting. I mean, the draft that they're doing isn't, we're gonna get first crack at that, to go through that. I just want to be sure that we're staying in sync with staff and then getting feedback rather than staff makes a comment, then the public comments in on it, and then we come back. Is that how you want it to go?
So,
That sounds like pandemonium.
So I think by definition, we're gonna get CUD input because
Right.
we've been asked to do that.
Yeah,
The only thing that this question keeps bringing up is, we've been making these board packets public.
Yeah.
You get them, and kind of the public does. If that's not acceptable, please let me know. But yeah.
The public should be
I don't
getting
think
the
you
board
get any choice
packets.
on that.
The public should be getting the board packets. And even though it is a bit of pandemonium and it's a little bit chaotic, this is the process that we vet things. And I
I'm
do
just
want to
asking
hear.
how many times you want the CUDs. Do you want them
Agreed.
to respond to this? I'm
Not yet.
asking for them.
Yeah, I'm
Do you
not,
want them to respond to this thing called policies? Or
not
do you
yet.
want to wait for the staff to sort?
I mean, if I were in their shoes, I'd wait, but they can do it. They can give us comments during the public input period. They know we're going to be working on this to put it into a different context. It's not a policy, it is a guideline. It's a working task guideline. And they can choose to give us feedback after we come back at it and reformat it and recharacterize it. Or if they want to do in the public input session, they can do that now. But I feel it is important to get that, just like lawmakers hear point counterpoint. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they're deciding. We are going to take that information in and let that affect our decision making or not.
Yeah, and I think this, you can rest assured that we're gonna, it's gonna be in the board packet. You know, we're not gonna, Rob and I will work the language, but, you know, that's just a matter of speed here, you know.
I'm just trying to find when we're done.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would say we're done
Yep.
when, I mean, I think we have, because this work is in service
Yeah.
to the Vermonters who are volunteering to stand up this critical infrastructure, that we have to make sure that we've heard from them prior to us ratifying.
Yes,
Exactly.
I agree with that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And we're not gonna finalize it until we get the board packet ready anyhow, so it's kind of like you are the first crack at it.
It's great.
How
Okay.
much time do we have left for staffing now, Madam Chair?
Okay, we have 4 minutes.
Well,
In addition to staff update, also a status of the RFP, if we can do that.
Okay. So from a staffing standpoint, the jobs are being posted for administrative assistant, general counsel, and the grant administrator. I've been trying to go through the state information, and I've been very confused in terms of how we contract for a GIS person, because apparently there's a statewide approved vendor list, but you still have to go through Administrative Bulletin 3.5. Spent a lot of time in that bulletin, was very confused. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I've got a phone call where that's all gonna get clarified. We should be able to bring in the GIS person relatively quickly because there's already an approved contractor list for the state. So we don't have to redo that, but we do have to do an RFP.
Is it a person or a contract?
It's a contractor.
And I'm sorry, you said the administrator, the general counsel, and what was the third one that's posted?
For the grant administrator.
Grant administrator, right?
We have not done additional work yet on the other two positions that we'll ask for your approval on. It's just with meeting every week and holiday week and everything else going on, we're a little bit overwhelmed right now. So just to be clear and frank about it.
What are those last two positions that you have in there?
It would be the broadband project developer. That would work with the CUDs on financing, whether it's raising additional funds, making sure they're ready to leverage the network they build to get to the bond market. And then another position that
It's basically a finance position. However, I'm not going to bring that to you until I get clarification on what the grant administrator roles are, because, you know,
Who's going to provide that to you?
June turning, I have to come to understanding, because what I don't want to do is create duplicate roles, right? If the grant administrator is going to handle all this, then we should be okay, but yeah, I'm skeptical.
It's
Yeah.
totally different.
They're totally different.
Thank you, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I just want to understand where the grant administrator role ends, where our finance support begins.
And what's the other one? The other position?
that was the finance support.
And the broadband project developer, whose job is going to be to help the CUDs get other funding, including all the processes that need to be in place in order to be able to go to the bond market.
That's the finance person, right? Or are these two separate?
These are two separate positions. One is, and so thank you. That's exactly why we have to get a little clarity
Yeah.
around what each one of these do.
Yeah, those two positions, I see like but the grant administrator and the finance person. are
Yep.
Totally separate.
Yep. So the point being, there, we don't need to have every CUD have a CFO. I kind of see a one CFO position that's, monitoring accounts receivable, accounts payable, making sure that, we've got things logged in the correct chart of accounts. I see that different than the person who's going out and helping CUDs put the process in place to raise funding.
You don't think each CUD will have their own finance person?
Well,
I would.
They need to
Maybe.
manage their own financial controls.
I would.
Maybe.
The state's not gonna provide that.
All right, well, the problem is some of these are so small, maybe what we do is we encourage them to share resources.
Or that's a great
Yeah.
Vicuda opportunity to have a shared resource of some sort.
I agree.
It's not set up to do that.
Neither is the state. The
Well-
state cannot be financial controls to a
No,
bunch of independent union districts.
That's true.
Yeah.
But we could, but Vicuda, or we could help identify some resources to share.
At the end of the day, you need somebody internal to each entity accountable for the money, because that's where bad things happen when you don't.
I think they have that largely.
Oh,
And so
I
the
hear
question is,
guidance
do we?
coming on.
Yeah, but all these, when there's money passing around, somebody has to be watching that, because bad things will happen without that.
Yeah, I think so. And that brings up a point that was raised last week. And, at risk of wearing out your pen there, we talked about looking at what the objectives for the bond market would be. Like, how do you know when you're qualified to go to the bond market, and setting that as a kind of holy grail structure out there.
I requested of EC Fiber of FX to send us what their bond requirements are, since I think that will help inform us.
I know I have them. I think we need a person, actually.
Yeah, that was a good discussion. And that's the issue, trying to grapple with it. How do we ensure all the CUDs have the proper financial controls in place? How do we do that in a way that is efficient, where we're not paying, for a smaller CUD for full-time? We don't want to necessarily come to the grant process, but I think you've captured it.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Thank you. Good feedback.
Okay, any other things on staffing you want to bring up?
Are we backing into a budget here without actually approving a budget?
Well, ultimately, we're going to bring you a budget.
I think you're right, the character is not single, but I think it is what it is, because we're running
Okay,
we're
just
running
pointing
100
it out.
miles an hour, but it's a good point to bring out that the ideal world is here's our budget and here's our plan, and then we proceed accordingly. But we're going 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, remember this started with a budget discussion. I presented the
Yeah.
budget, and then we realized we got to
Yeah.
sort these things out before we approve the budget. But ultimately, you will approve the budget.
Okay, RFP update?
RFP is out. Once you get that.
Okay, yes. The RFP is out for the broadband pre-construction program. Thank you for all the feedback. I believe I integrated all of those ideas, and we haven't received any applications yet. I'm expecting in the next few weeks we will start receiving those applications. I think that's really about it on that, but there also is the next step. The next step is going to be the scoring criteria, which I am working on and will bring back. It's clear, it's laid out in the RFP, but then there's also the grant agreement. We have a model grant agreement that was used for the H315 funds. I've heard that there were challenges with that grant agreement, and it would be helpful for me if we could create a working group or somebody to work with, so we can be ready with a grant agreement when the funds are awarded, so there's not an additional delay at that point.
I have marked up the H315 grant agreement. And I'll just send you those comments.
Yeah, we actually love your help with this. If we talk about working board, when Rob and I talked, this is probably a good place for a working committee. even if it's a committee of one and it's Holly, it works.
Got it.
So,
Get it.
Thank you.
so
for your
like there is the potential, we may have an application for the board to review next week. If not, I would be shocked if we didn't have one by the following board meeting, if not several.
And have you gotten any feedback, like, like, oh, good, this works for us, or we don't get what this RFP means? Any feedback?
Yeah, there's a concern, and this goes right to what you were talking about, Brian, which again, I'm not prepared to bring this to the board, but I'll give you some foreshadow on what the concern is. And it's the dilemma that do we design the entire network for each CUD, which if you do that up front, you run this problem over time. The design gets stale. But if you don't do it up front, then you have this problem where, well, you haven't got the make ready started at the right time. You don't know exactly what the costs are. We haven't figured, I personally don't have a recommendation at this point, but that's the dilemma I'm talking about here.
Yeah, we've heard from one CUD that the amount that's allocated is not enough. But that I don't believe that CUD is only one so far.
But we might be all right.
But the point of the one thing that's really important for the CUDs and for the board to remember with this RFP is we're asking for over the next 18 months. We're also asking for a very detailed timeline of when during those 18 months you're going to engage in certain activities. We're looking for a phased approach, is where we had initially landed on these applications. And that's something that we'll review when we review the applications. But that is one area that there seems to be a debate within the CUDs of whether they want all their pre-construction funding now, which the 30 million will not cover, or if it's for phase 1 and phase 2.
Well, the 30 million may cover them all, because it depends if we have some of, I think, I had a long talk with one of the CUDs about that issue. And we might, or within $1 million, and there might be $1 million. So I thought available somewhere else. But I think the real issue here is trying to make a decision around, do we do the detailed design all up front, or we do that in a phase approach? We were originally going into this place, we would do this in phases. But there are some weaknesses in that discussion, and there may be no clean answer. It's another one of those things we got to make a decision, recognizing that there are problems with it.
I don't think that's for us to decide. Honestly, I think it's for them to decide. And the way I think about it is, if I'm scoring an application, if you're coming to me with an ask for the entire territory build out, right? We're going to have to get into this concept of risk and likelihood of success, right? Because every application is going to come with some risk. And if someone's doing an entire build out all at once, that is much riskier than if they're doing it in a phased, kind of segment by segment basis. And so if someone, let's say their target is 7,000 locations, if they come to us with a plan for 7,000 locations all at once, that is, in my experience, that's going to be riskier than someone who comes to us with, hey, I've got 7,000 locations and I'm asking you for 1,500, a project to hit the first 1,500 first. That's a less risky proposition to me in terms of cost, in terms of execution, in terms of timeframes, in terms of resource availability, in terms of materials availability, all of that stuff. So that's
the approach that we had taken, and we'd encourage the CUDs to come back. Don't ask for everything now. You can come back in 6 months later as you get your next design. It's all about accountability at this point. Another change in the RFP was reflecting on some of the conversation we had with the commissioner last week about how there's different ways to distribute funds based on where the CUD is at. That can ensure accountability, and that flexibility is something that we can do. Every single grant agreement doesn't need to be the same. It can be informed by our individual risk assessment of each CUD.
Right, and at the same time, Brian, I would like to say you could spin that and say there might be an RFP response that comes back where they've got funding, they're ready to roll, that it makes sense that actually doing the whole 7,000 in one shot looks good. Their proposal and what we know about them is less risky because it's all in one, just because of what they have in place. So it could cut both ways.
Totally agree with that.
But what you said is spot on. I think it's their responsibility to propose it.
Yeah, I want to we're supposed to help them. We're not supposed to do for them,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
So we provide them guidance, we give them suggestions and guardrails. they come to us with how they want to do it, and and then ours is to, unfortunately, we get to assess that, right?
Tell your story and tell it well, and we get to assess and figure out if this is good to go the way it is or not, but let them do the proposal.
Right.
And the amount of funding is also going to change over time, not necessarily the total amount, but the allocation. Like if we have a district that partners and gets a grant from a whole other entity that takes care of all those addresses, that's going to make additional money available for other districts. When we get the updated data, we may find that one of the districts had a 30% or 40% reduction in the number of unserved addresses. Those are decisions we're going to have to make in order to get the money to go to where it needs to be to make this happen.
So because we're talking about pre-construction grants and whether it's parts or all, I just bring your attention to page 3 of the NEK feedback on the guidance, which is a request to expand section 8085B under the language and any other costs deemed appropriate to allow them under pre-construction grants to make dollar commitments to fiber materials. And, that either gets parking lotted or, we're going to have to take it up in the process of being ready to evaluate these pre-construction applications. But I didn't want it to go unnoticed that it was specifically mentioned as a request.
Thank you.
And their suggestion was that the state does bulk purchasing, which I know there's not necessarily agreement among the CUDs, I don't believe, on that question.
We did hear from them early on, pro and con either way.
I think that is a thing that the staff really has to recommend as result. Yeah. And we can't be on the fence about that. We're either doing it or we're not.
Okay. The bulk purchasing?
Yeah, but again, I feel like it's not ours to impose on them. It's ours to say, we would like to facilitate this opportunity if you would like to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
And if consensus is not attained by the members, then we say we weren't able to do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe that's a
It's
question.
not ours to
Yeah,
impose.
Yes.
that's a good, yeah.
But could we even do it if we wanted to? It's kind of the.
Talking to Chris, it seems pretty grim.
Yeah, Dan, jump in.
Dan knows.
So this just seems to be a parking lot issue. To me, Ikuda, their role, what they can bring to the table, and these are, there are standards that we've talked about that keep coming up. The bulk purchase, if there's a consortium that wants to get in and say, hey, let's reserve. So
One of the parking lot issues is what is the role of Ikuda? Because I don't see them as having the funding to go out and buy fiber, for example. They would have to apply to us to do that.
Yeah, exactly. But I actually, to be clarified, my hope is more that I'm less worried about them and borrowing or raising money. I'm more looking to them to be consensus builders and facilitators, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
instead of dealing with 9 separate entities, it feels more like we're dealing with a smaller, more aligned number.
And I so agree with you, Brian, but I think rather than us just talking about this here, because we bring it up all the time, we should have an official conversation,
Sure. Yeah.
bring them in the room,
Totally agree.
say, boy, would we have a lot of benefit out of.
So their new program manager is in the room. Not to put you on the spot.
We're talking about
Meeting with us.
Do you want to make a comment on this? I have a discussion.
Spot on when, the idea that the CUDA wants to be a tool for consensus for decision-making for the CUDs. But what that does mean is that we need to have an opportunity ahead of time to be abreast of the decisions that your board is even considering so that I can be able to present our united voice. That has to be a voice that's considered and has to be one that, has time to formulate those points. As for what our organization is going to look like besides voicing the CUD's views to your board, we're also looking at organizing shared services. This is something that's going to take time. I'm going to be meeting with all the CUDs to evaluate their different needs and desires in this realm. So with regard to financial controls, this is going to be a part of what I'm doing. With regard to the RFP as well, we're going to be working to make sure that all the CUDs are on track with that. Not the CUDs are going to be doing their own grant administration, grant applications, but the association will be helping facilitate that as well. But the key point I'd like to make is that Vikuda would like to be the united front for the CUDs interacting with this board. So to get policies ahead of time, to potentially have a voice at the table would be key for what we're looking at, what our board desires. But I can have some more comments along the slides during the public input period. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Sorry, I short circuit you, Patty.
No worries. No worries. It's fine. We're an easy board.
Quite all right.
I mean, that's, Laura had on the agenda what we do with Vikuda and its role, and I think we still discuss that if we have time. But let's have, okay.
That's great.
We are now at 10:55. We have break scheduled for 10:40. Does everybody need a break? Does anybody need a break?
Quick one.
All right, let's take 5, and then I would like to go to affordability so that we don't keep punting and pushing that off. All right, so 5-minute break. All right.
Recording will be stopped now. And audio is back on.
Okay, we are resuming at 11:02, and before we move to affordability discussion, I do want to take up the next board meeting and just spend a few minutes on this item. And board, we are all running really fast in terms of trying to get up to speed and work on things, but we're also noticing that we don't have enough time in between meetings. So the proposal is, rather than meet weekly, and we have a scheduled meeting next week, and then we have a break. And the question for the board is whether we hold the meeting next week or if we give a couple weeks break here and reconvene at the '28th. So rather than hold the 16th, the week of the 20th, we don't have a meeting. We have a planned meeting for the 16th. I'm just wondering if we cancel the 16th and go for the 28th and make that an all-day meeting.
Make the 28th an all-day meeting.
Yes.
What was the reason we didn't have a meeting the week of the 20th?
We had-
could shift to going every other week now.
Thursday, Tuesday.
Yeah, it was a scheduling issue.
It's a scheduling issue.
I don't know what happened, but I can't meet on the 28th. Is that something we said before?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Yeah, it
Set it
was
at
Tuesday
1.
afternoons.
I'm fine to go to, every 2 weeks with a longer meeting. I do wonder if we should keep our next meeting for something like we should hear from VQDA and the CUDs, and can we hear
And get these
from
guidelines.
someone on the FCC, or the RDOF, things like just having presentations
closure
to
on
us as
something.
opposed to a discussion.
So take some workload off staff and have other people present.
Yeah, for the next
For
meeting
the
and then go
16th.
to.
That'd be fine.
You think you guys
Yeah,
can pull
I
some speakers in?
Yeah.
I think that would be fine, and like, there's a chance that there will be a grant application review to renew too.
Right,
Review
but-
too, if it comes in the end of this week.
But we have no evaluation criteria.
You've got to we're working, you and I are working on the
Okay, we'll
evaluation.
put that on the agenda as well. It was described in the RFP, but not the point process. And that's something for the agenda next week, I would
You
say
want
that.
evaluation
16th.
criteria on the agenda for next week?
Yes,
Okay.
to confirm how we're gonna score.
So we're every 2 weeks, and so we're developing the agenda. We have evaluation criteria. We want someone to speak on RDOF. So here,
RDOF and locations, the intersection.
and locations, okay. You want, so, do
We want a meeting with the CUDs.
you want, okay.
Do we want all the CUDs or just VQDA or the VQDA Executive Committee?
To what purpose?
Well, we keep saying we should meet with them.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying,
I'd like to hear from VQDA, especially with the new executive director.
Yeah.
Is it an ED? Are you an ED?
No, not yet.
Whatever your role is, I'd like to.
Program coordinators.
Okay, like to hear from him next week.
Yeah.
And give you an opportunity to spend half an hour with us.
If I may, perhaps to invite the executive board of Bakuda as well to be there with me, but that would be great.
All right,
Either
we'll
way.
consider that. Not saying yes or no at this point, but we'll consider. So let's leave a placeholder for VQDA for the 16th. Again, I'm mindful of trying to take workload off you.
Yeah.
But the matrix and the evaluation matrix is going to be something we do have to look at because we have proposals coming in from the RFP.
Okay, so when I send a survey out, Makuda, make sure you fill it out quick.
Yeah, I think ultimately, Rob and I are gonna have to sit down Monday and put that criteria together, just speaking to the CUDs. So make sure we get that
Okay.
back by Monday morning.
I'll get that posted tonight.
and so is there anything else on the parking lot list that should be on our next agenda?
I'm going to suggest we make the policies and guidelines not ready for the 16th, but that's later on.
Yes, please.
So you've got time for that. Okay.
I would love to see if, I mean, I don't know how much work the dashboard is, but it's gonna be hard to even do the grant evaluations without it, so.
I think we can do that.
We're getting there. It's just an expansion on what the previous spreadsheet that was provided.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to be at a point of having. I guess we can get links to the public version of the business plans if that's helpful at this point, and then if there's questions,
Okay.
we can have them come in and we can talk to them.
Okay, so the 16th will be a half day. The next meeting is the 28th.
The 16th is a half day starting at 9 a.m. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then the 28th, we had planned for 1 o'clock.
I think there was a reason we couldn't do the mornings. I don't know why on the 28th, but
I've got a conflict.
That's why.
And you have a conflict in the afternoon. I have a conflict in the morning.
So I think the
So-
proposal is to move to 2 weeks, right? So
So are we going to hold the 28th? Are we going to keep it for the afternoon then?
If we do it on the afternoon of the 20th, I will miss a chunk of the meeting and I'll be virtual.
Okay.
Is there any chance that did we decide, I mean, Thursday is such a better day for me anyway. Did we decide specifically that the 30th
Yeah.
does not work?
Patty had a.
Patty has a
Thursday.
conflict on Thursday.
On the 3rd,
what about the 29th Thursday? We throw another day in the mix.
can't do the
Wednesday?
29th.
No. Or the 1st.
1st of
October.
October.
Yeah.
So we will have gone 1, 2, 3 weeks. And we were not doing the 23rd because, which would have been every other week.
23rd, I'm away. I'm away 22nd,
as well.
23rd, and 24th, 3 days.
I will want to know your vacation schedule so that I can plan mine to be when yours is.
Excellent. Come to Maine with me.
Oh, nice. And the 21st wasn't, this is like, the 21st wasn't available, Tuesday the 21st. We've gotten backwards in terms of every other week.
Yeah.
How about the 20? Should we do the 20?
I can do the 21st.
I can do I cannot do the 21st, but you can meet without me. I can always.
They're recorded.
I'll make
It's not-
Morning.
But, I mean, the 28th is what we had planned.
Yeah.
So I would prefer we stick to the 28th unless like half of us can't make it for some reason. There's a
Is it
conflict.
the afternoon of the 28th?
Yes.
Okay.
And Brian, if you can't make that one because it was originally planned, I'd prefer to stick with that than,
That's fine. I need to step out for
Okay.
about an hour in the middle of the meeting
okay.
and I'll be virtual.
Well, let's keep the 28th at 1. And then after that, we move to every other week, but we move to full days.
So full day is 9 to 4, 5.
Do we want to start earlier on the 28th, like at noon perhaps? Is that running up? I don't know what time the commitments were in the morning.
I can.
Okay.
I could squeak out 12:30.
And so, yeah, 12 that would matter then.
So 1 to
Just keep it
5.
1 o'clock,
Okay,
5.
but then starting the 5th of October,
1 to 5.
we want to still 1 to 5. We don't want to switch to 1 to full day.
No, October.
It's 28th is 1 to 5.
Okay, yes.
Then we're gonna go 9 to 5.
And then beginning on the 12th,
Oh, the 12th.
we would go,
This might be a problem. Yeah, the 12th is it's,
Are we gonna?
this room
stick
isn't, this room is available every other week, but it's the first week, so it would be the 5th that's available, and then it's, in other words, it's not available on the 12th. I did learn that they are going to be doing some improvements next door in terms of audio visual. When that happens, I don't have an answer.
the
So
question is, could we take the PUC hearing room on an all day, every other week, if we could do that?
I don't know about I know we could take this room every other week, but it's, the 12th isn't an option.
And
The 5th
you're
is-
not doing Thursday, Patty, because.
Because
you
I
a
have
conflict
conflicts on
with Marinette.
Thursdays beginning in October.
And
I can't do Wednesdays and I can't do Thursdays.
I have a conflict in the morning on Tuesdays until the end of October. So.
Fridays?
I got a Tuesday afternoon conflict pretty much every week.
Fridays.
So you and I
I
are
can
in. How does Friday work?
What day is Friday?
Friday is the 8th.
Friday's the 8th.
Yeah, so already into the,
Fridays are actually probably the best day for me.
fine for me. I may
I can
eventually
make-
run into some challenges.
Yeah, I could make
Actually
Fridays
travel.
work. I could Make Fridays work.
It looks to
Fridays
me,
in October are gonna be tough. I got a bunch of weekends, put them out. I got a wedding, I got
What about Mondays?
I know that Vacuda just shifted their board meeting, and I think there'd be
To 10 o'clock
a
on
lot
Mondays.
of wrath.
What is the department's meeting with Vacuda? It's
It's,
a standing meeting.
it's the weekly Vacuda meeting, that's all. It's not a standing meeting with the department.
Oh, okay.
But the department supported. I mean,
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
Rob's
Yeah.
original.
Yeah, yeah.
And what time is the Vacuda meeting?
10 a.m. this Monday,
Yeah.
So 10 a.m.
and every 2 weeks.
every 2 weeks. So is there a way that we could do it on every other Monday that they're not meeting? I don't know. I don't have it in a recurring thing in my calendar for when it is. I don't believe, or do I?
Well, because
I
every
do
two
now.
weeks,
Nice.
We have a recurring placeholder out.
Perfect. So like Monday, the 1st is open. I'm still in October. No, I'm sorry. I went to the end of October now. Great. So
Monday, the 4th is open.
Monday, the 4th is open. And that means that we would be on that schedule. So do we want to do this for Mondays?
So every other week on Mondays.
Starting on
The 4th.
the 4th. Because it does appear that this room is open. So that's
Okay.
yeah, it's
Other folks.
looking good.
I'm fine to move to Mondays. On the 4th, I would have to be virtual.
Okay. And what time during that period?
So these will be all day meetings.
All day meetings. So
So can we just, I can't do 7 hours. The diminishing return of a 7-hour
It's a
meeting is
ridiculous
just crazy.
idea.
Like 4 is solid. We can get, I mean, let's, yeah, I feel the urgency too, but 7 is not a solution. That's just nonsense, frankly.
I don't think you can plan an agenda for 7 hours,
I can't
actually.
keep attention span for 7 hours. I got, I mean, that's the limit on me, but that's just,
How long is reasonable?
I mean,
5?
I think 4 hours is solid. If you want to go 5 for special circumstances, then we've got to have a really productive agenda. But anything over 4, you got to have 4 with a break. You can crank some stuff out. After that, you're just playing games with time.
all right, so I will have to manage the time to be more, the agenda is going to have a time intervals on them. And we lay the agenda out with time zones because otherwise, because we're not
It does
making the
that.
agenda now. In our 4 hours, we're not making the agenda.
We're doing 3 hours now.
Or 3 hours, but we're still not making the agenda.
Well, yeah,
we can also create work groups to try to address some of these issues outside of meetings and bring back the
You have to
policies.
notice their meetings. It has to, I mean. I
Well,
know
if it's a work group, that's not an official
if
meeting.
it's not, we're not gonna have a
If we
quorum.
don't have a quorum.
Right, exactly.
That's why we said, if we get 1 or 2 board members to help us with the agreement.
Yep, up to
That-
2.
And I think
Yeah,
that would
subcommittees.
work well. I think because if,
That's true.
Yeah.
All right, let's call this because we need to move along here.
So
So we're gonna move to the 4th.
To the 4th.
We're gonna do
Every other
half-day
Monday.
meetings every other Monday.
what time?
I've got a standing Monday morning conflict.
Afternoons?
Afternoon is much better for me.
Okay,
Okay, 1 to 5, Is that it? 1 to, no, it's 12 to 4.
12 to 4.
12 to 4 is gonna, okay, I'll have to do it.
Isn't
And
that
every
better,
other week.
Rod?
It's certainly better. I just have to, we're trying to be a 1-car household, daycare. So I'll have to figure it out.
Every
So,
other Monday? Can
Every
somebody
other
else try?
Monday, not, there's definitely 1 more. So starting Monday the 4th,
There's some-
12 to 4, you said?
12 to 4.
12 to 4 in Giga, okay, and I'm just gonna do this right now to make sure that it's,
Can you invite us?
yes,
Thank you.
yeah, I'll do that.
You invite us using our, anyway, I'll forward it.
I'll get one first started here, and then I'll do the rest.
Okay, so our next meeting is the 16th. We are not meeting on the 28th, correct?
Correct.
We are not meeting on the 28th.
Is that accurate?
No, we are meeting on the 28th,
Our next meeting is the 16th.
and then the 28th, and then the 4th. Is what I have. Or are we going 6? We're getting rid of the 28th. Is that what we're doing?
That's what I heard, but
what was it, 16?
The 16th of
Is our
September.
cleanup meeting.
Yep. And then,
And then I
And
thought
then
we
we
were
moved-
having 2
And then we
weeks.
had the 28th. We had the 28th on the schedule, but we also are talking moving to the 4th.
Okay.
So let's cancel the 28th. This is a question.
Because that was a day when one of us can come in the morning, one of us can come in the afternoon.
Right, and maybe we reserve the 28th for working group meetings if that's necessary. So any subcommittee meeting activity we could keep on the 28th, but not full board.
Yeah, it also makes sense, I think, to do a working group on the evaluation criteria. Maybe we could do that virtually, but certainly would love some board members to help with that once we have a proposal.
Okay, are we good? So no meeting on the 28th. Meet the 16th and we'll start every other week on 10/4. Okay, with that, let's move to affordability discussion. Holly is going to lead us through this.
Hopefully this. Let me switch from that. I will update. Okay, Holly, let me get your presentation set up here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else need it out?
Hold on one second. I want to make sure that there's something funky with Teams that I want to make sure that I did this the right way. Let me do this one more time. It doesn't show up in the
Printed
video.
backwards, Laura, so that's actually the last page.
Yes, I read, oh, great. I read it this morning.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, we are good to go.
That's my answer.
Okay.
So thank you for offering this opportunity for me to lead you in discussion, but let me say out front that we definitely need some discussion on this, and I'm not here to tell you what I think the right answer is. I come to this work after a year of standing up a new
Hold on a second.
nonprofit.
Hold on a second here. I'm sorry, Holly.
I'm going to keep talking, Rob. It's okay.
Okay.
Called Equal Access to Broadband. Equal Access to Broadband was started with funding from EC Fiber because during the COVID crisis, they were unsure how to meet the urgent demands of families who couldn't afford fiber service and were basically blocked out of school access because they weren't online. And so Equal Access to Broadband started studying this problem, and for a year, I've been speaking with social services agencies and getting the lay of the land in the general environment on affordability questions and broadband. And I'm here to tell you there's no national strategy on this. Equal Access to Broadband has seen the need for a bridge between ISPs and social services to meet the needs of low-income families. But that's not necessarily an answer to what is affordability. So let's talk about what affordability really means. And I've got some ideas for you. Next page, please. So in the world of broadband, we talk about availability, meaning let's build the network. We talk about affordability. We don't always say what that means. And we talk about adoption. How do we get people using broadband effectively? Affordability appears in the purpose and intent of Act 71. And in fact, it appears pretty often. Next page, please. But I'm going to talk to you about, just for a moment, to set some context, why do we care? And I'm really saying this to you as a former executive at a public media company. We really, in order to keep democracy together, we really need to be sure that everyone is able to connect. We are moving towards a new world order where education, telemedicine, public benefits, employment, and culture are all accessed through the internet. And this is old news to everybody in the room, but it bears just registering how important understanding availability is. And the Pew Charitable Trust went out and did a survey of low-income parents, And what they basically concluded was where people see internet as too expensive, they just push it aside and say, I can't go there. And that means we effectively created not just a digital divide, which by the way goes all the way back to the Clinton administration. And so it's been the digital divide has been a problem for decades. Now we're just feeding into a digital divider, and we don't need more divisions. Next page, please. So there's a lot of people in the marketplace working on affordability. These are just a handful of websites of people who are doing it. You've got the Benton Institute and something called the Web Foundation, and you've got something called Access Now, and all kinds of Broadband Now. There's gazillions of them out there working to create guidelines for access and working on this concept of what does affordability mean. And on the right, you've got the FCC and their emergency broadband benefit, which was funded by an act of Congress at the end of 2020. Next page, please. So it's important to recognize that in Vermont, we have two different populations. One is a low-income population of about 40,000 people, and there's Vermont's unserved or underserved households, a population of approximately 60,000 people, and they're not necessarily the same people. So when we talk about affordability, we may not be talking necessarily about low-income households. We could be talking about a concept of affordability that's not just qualified by a public benefit standard. Availability says, let's serve the 60,000 addresses. That's what Act 71 says. Let's serve those 60,000 addresses. And then it talks about affordability, but it doesn't say what that means. So here's my little cheat sheet on affordability from Act 71. There seems to be two goals: affordable service, whatever that means, and support for low income and disadvantaged communities. So in the findings, there's references to affordability. In the purpose, there's a mention of the state's goal of affordable broadband. And then when we get to the powers of the VCBB, we talk about affordable access, and we have to, by the way, make recommendations for affordable access in our annual report to the legislature. And then specifically in the construction grants, and this is where the rubber starts to meet the road, we are directed to support affordable service options and support low income and disadvantaged communities. Next page, please. So going back, there's some of this goes to work of these other nonprofit organizations, and one called the Web Foundation, which sort of is the good cop on the World Wide Web, talks about affordable access, and they go so far as to say that access is the ability of people to connect physically. I think of that as availability. And then affordable access is the cost of access on a baseline amount for a specific quantity of data. And they're so specific, and they've done a world study on this. And they've said, well, really, affordability comes to play when you can buy 1 gigabyte of data for less than 2% of your annual income. So
is that capacity? Is that storage? What is?
That's capacity. Okay. So I'm looking at that and just did the math for you there. I mean, you know, that's a rate of $58 a month if you're on what is a low income household standard for 4 people of $35,000 a year. Another organization, the Benton organization, which reports on broadband and digital equity, talks about finding high performance broadband and talks more about how to make that broadband available to people and supports programs for availability. Like, how do you figure out how to use broadband instead of also buying telephone service and also buying cable service. And how do you figure out what speed you need to buy? All of this is baked into some people's concepts of digital equity. And I'm just mentioning these to you here so that you have some context for what the discussion is out in the public realm. There's everything from the very specific affordable access to a broader concept of what digital equity might look like. I submit that we're kind of faced with this tough situation because we're asked to include factors that actually increase the cost of service and may, if left unaddressed, reduce affordability and equity. So we're asked, first of all, we're asked for to build in areas where the finance, construction, operation cost and drops and the customers per mile are not commercial. In other words, that's my parlance for nobody wants to do them on a profit-making business plan. We have capital costs that might be imputed to our system goals of universal service and sustainability for a fixed speed, high quality system. And we also are obligated to consider net neutrality and that other cost, that interesting cost factor of if this network isn't performing, do we transfer it on default back to the state or back to this organization? That's not going to help your cost of capital necessarily. So there's all of these factors that could impact affordability. And then on a more pedestrian level, there's the consumer access costs. I mean, it's not just your bill from your ISP, it's the cost of power and equipment and how you transfer to a new age of technology where you're used to having cable service and a landline telephone. There's a lot of education required to get you from point A to point B. Thanks, Ryan. So there is federal assistance for qualified households. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. And it applies to people who fall into these various categories. There is a lot of latitude there in terms of qualification, but you have to either go to a broadband provider who's willing to work with you to apply, or you have to have internet access and documentation that is proof that you qualify. And in my experiences, that documentation in a population, now we're talking for low income families. This is not general affordability. This is how we're addressing low income families as a nation. And if you don't have that letter that arrived saying that you were eligible for free and reduced lunch, you're not applying through the system. And by the way, if you're an ISP that wasn't delivering broadband services as of December and filing a 477, you weren't an ETC, an eligible telecom company in December of 2020, you're not eligible to collect this subsidy that's made available from the FCC. Now, this is still being modified by Congress. The appropriation is going from $3.2 billion to $14.2 billion, and it's part of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. So the book's not written on this yet, but I think we need to, and the benefit is going down from up to $50 a month to up to $30 a month. I'm bringing this to your attention because in terms of talking about affordability, we want to build, in my opinion, a process that leans on these federal dollars that are available for certain populations in Vermont. And where there's an intersection between that group of people, the 60,000 that are and underserved, And that group of people who qualify as low-income families or households, the 40,000, there's some subset of those people that we can access these dollars to help. And it's just going to take us some work. So as of July of 2021, only 1 in 12 eligible households had been approved for these EBB subsidies. And that speaks to how difficult it is to access this program. 35 ISPs in Vermont have registered to collect the subsidy. This is money that is approved to a household, but the money goes directly to the ISP. So 35 ISPs have registered. I will tell you, when you look at that list, there are many companies I've never heard of before. And 13 of them are fixed broadband. So a lot of mobile providers. 5,688 Vermonters, or just 14% of that pool of 40,000, have registered for this program. Okay, next page, please.
14% of the pool of 40,000 eligible low income.
Yes. And then there's the question of, well, that's the federal program. And by the way, that's administered by the FCC. You register with a thing called USAC, the Universal Service Access Corporation. And it's basically administered by the carriers themselves. You know, hi, you're qualified, you have your form, I'll help you get service. The social services providers that I've talked to, they have literally said to me, I don't understand it. I just send them to this website and tell them to talk to Comcast. And that's really the level of development of our support mechanism here in Vermont. So there are companies here in Vermont that are offering discounted rates that are actually below the subsidies offered. So Comcast, $9.95 a month, Charter, $14.99 a month, Consolidated is participating in Lifeline, and I'm not even sure that they have a special rate. I'm just saying that they do participate here. But this is a whole area where commercial carriers have said, yeah, we can bring qualified low-income households onto our network. Why do they do it? I just want you to be aware. Why did they do it? Well, they do it because every additional household is support on the system, support on the network. And if it's going to be paid for by federal dollars, even better, right? It's all additive to the value of an existing network. And they do it for social cause reasons. I'm not saying that there's no positive public benefit. Of course there is. But I make a suggestion here for your consideration that CUDs serving areas that are non-commercial should not be expected to offer discount rates that are basically supported by other customers. That's the kind of thing that a big system like Comcast can afford. And it's a commercial system with a return and shareholders. And I'm not sure that our CUDs in the pockets that we're trying to serve can really expect to do that. So that's one question of affordability for you to consider. So just putting some perspective on this, if we were considering affordability to be just about the 40,000 low-income Vermonters, if we had them at $50 a month per household, it would cost us as a state $24 million annually. Now that's not the 60,000. That's assuming that the 40,000 were something we were going to support through our program. And this is just an illustration. And my point is that if you made a household contribution rate of $22 a month, that would offer you about 10.5 million. And the net public cost then, or the balance, would be 13 million a year. And isn't it interesting that that would be covered by that FCC subsidy? So we could effectuate a rate of $50 a month per household, and it would only cost individual low-income households $22 a month. Is that making sense to you?
And we would have, that would be funded from somewhere at the rate of $10.5 million a year.
It would be funded by low-income households at a rate of $10.5 million a year.
Okay.
I'm saying there would be a contribution by low-income households. And my experience in talking to social services agencies is $22 a month is doable for many. I'm not saying it's doable for all. It's doable for many. And so in developing programs around equal access to broadband, that's the benchmark we've been using. And it's certainly substantially below most retail monthly charges. Certainly it's not less than $9.95 a month from Comcast. So if you're in a Comcast service area, you would go for that. You would participate in that if you're a low income household. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what it's like to be on the edge of not being able to afford broadband in Vermont, because this is something I've come to understand fairly well. The barriers are huge. This is a population that moves a lot. So I moved again, and how do I find out who provides service? That's a baseline question for many Vermonters. I don't even know who my service provider is or how to find out. Another question is this an essential service, and can I afford another expense? This is a population, given any question, the Pew research showed this, that if you're asking me to pick up another cost, I'm not going to do it. So I can't necessarily manipulate between my cell phone bill and my cable bill and figure out how to get to this new cost without incurring a lot of additional angst and expense. The third thing is there a subsidy? Where do I register and how? This is an open question. There's not a lot of information on it, although the FCC is promoting packages to explain this now. How much is my conduit and drop? Huge barrier to service. It is the drop. And so often, in my experience, low income residential locations require conduit. It's ironic that people who can afford conduit least get assigned a conduit standard often. And so one of the things that we need to talk about if we're assigning standards for deployment is if we're going to include cost of connection in our construction, what are those standards for conduit and how do they impact affordability? And then this population is also often waiting for the landlord and waiting for the ISP, because while the ISPs are taking the subsidies or creating a low cost package, they're not necessarily putting these customers at the top of the list for connection. And so there's a lot of difficult orchestration. Has my landlord approved the conduit? Has my ISP come to do a survey? How do most people don't even understand all that complexity. And finally, there's the barrier of how do I use broadband? Why do I use broadband? And is this new equipment that I have to buy? When you put all of that together, you can understand, well, families who are just trying to make ends meet are not rushing to broadband, even though I maintain we could save them a lot of money and deliver services better if they understood this as a connection tool. And one of my poster children for this is Pat Gable, who runs the state courts system. Pat, I used to be a partner at Downs Racklin, and Pat used to be a partner at Downs Racklin. And we got talking about how the participation of people named in suits in our state court system has grown since COVID, because instead of taking a day off work to try to attend to defend a parking ticket or a child custody case or whatever the issue is, social services issue, they are able to participate over broadband where they have it. So as I said, I've been working with Equal Access to Broadband on this, and we've done an enrollment trial based on a web-based social services delivery tool. And what we did was we worked with a group called RISI down in central Vermont, and we did a web-based tool that identifies who the provider is at an E911 address. And we helped consumers get qualified for their federal benefit. And we did a web broadband training for our partner in this trial, a social services agency called the Orange County Parent-Child Center. And then we made a bridge to the CUD service provider and said, here's a person qualified for a subsidy, here's an address, it's within your system, and they would like to be connected. And the missing piece here is just making sure that we have enough money to do the connection itself. I think I've spoken to a lot of these issues, but one of the biggest problems that you all should be aware of is if we're talking about not just affordability generally, but affordability specifically to low income folks, not only are they flummoxed by the barriers that I've mentioned, but they don't raise their hand and say, hi, I'm a low income household and I really need your help. And most of the information that identifies these people is subject to confidentiality and rules around disclosure. And so it is really hard for an ISP to do this service work unless the individual household identifies themselves. Thanks, Brad. So I'm wondering how we can create a broadband system that helps deliver social services, gets low-income families online, because I think that if we encourage adoption by both sides of that equation, social services and low-income families, it will help support these networks that we're trying to build that are in non-commercial areas. It's additional revenue that can be supported, and we might find cost savings from the agencies that we're able to add back into these networks. Rob? So ultimately, I think VCBB has this question: will the VCBB define affordability in terms of service pricing, like a quantity of data or storage or access for a particular price, or will affordability be defined by creating sustainable network operating costs that keeps the cost of service down as low as it can be? And how do we express that in a way that ensures our CUD collaborators implement on that low cost structure? Okay, I hope that was helpful.
I have a lot of questions. Early on, you talked about low income and disadvantage. Could you explain that term disadvantage, what that means?
Well, I don't know which context it was in, but I'm thinking of that as the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And really, my bigger question to you is, are we going to talk about affordability as trying to keep the costs down, or are we going to talk about affordability as low-income families? And if we're going to talk about affordability as low-income families, then we have to talk about how to qualify them and get involved in standard setting and all that sort of thing.
So let me jump in. My head is in the space of the business model has to make sense. I would love to have these problems to address low income issues in that we have a network already built and established, so we have something to deal with. But first and foremost, you got to build the wire, you get the fiber out there, you got to have the network. So the business case has to be sustainable. It has to be affordable. If you price it too high, no one's going to come. We have 8 customers per mile in WEC service territory. A lot of our service territory is this, exactly what you're talking. The CUD's challenge is to build this and build it so it's affordable to everybody. So you get enough uptake that it makes sense to string the fiber. And then in addition to that, there's folks that are low income that can't afford the affordable, and then what to do in that space and how to leverage FCC funds and federal programs and federal dollars to bring that in. But at the first crux of this is that the business case has to stand up, that affordability means normal person, regardless of income, is going to buy this product. And I use the number, if it's $200 a month, I'm not buying it. If it's $89, $90, yes. But like there's just a normal standard that the CUDs have to build this to that gets the fiber deployed. And if that doesn't happen, then there's no low income problem to solve because we don't have the fiber to even attach them to.
To attempt to take the word affordability out of what your definition just was, is it fair to say that what you're looking for is a business plan where the expectation of customers per mile will be met? Like it's priced so that you will attain what the business plan is for customers per mile?
I mean, I'm going to go steal Brian's line again, but I think the CUDs or whoever's building this have to put forward a plan that's viable. However they can figure that out, and I don't want to put.
So the pricing has to meet the plan. Is really what you said, and that by definition has to be affordable enough so that people actually do what the plan proposes.
Right. And we're going to need to see evidence of, their take rate of 50% or 60% is backed by, this business case, because at the end of the day, they have to go to the bank too. They're going to get grant dollars to help. They're going to get 25, 35% off coupon, but they still have to go to the bond markets. The bond markets are going to want to say, if you're going to charge $100 and your take rate, you're saying your take rate is 90%, they're going to challenge them on that. If you're going to charge $100 and your take rate is 40%, that passes the laugh test, so to speak. So the business plan that they put forward, I want to give them enough room to solve for affordability to make the fiber get rolled out. And then what we should be talking about is potentially, okay, as part of their submission for construction funds, what do they plan to do on low income space? And let them come to us with their ideas. That's my suggestion.
I like that suggestion. I think it's imperative for us, the sustainable network operating costs, I think is, the big difference here. So, in watching this and thinking about this for a long time, this is, we are supporting public entities delivering critical infrastructure, which is not the model that currently exists for delivering broadband. And so, when we think about these questions, I think about well, how do the electric utilities, how do they deal with this, which is the frame that I want to be in when thinking about policy for the CUDs. The other thing I would note, just in case everyone has not heard my rant on the FCC funding, I mean, those programs largely have been driven by the Comcast, the AT&Ts, the private providers in order to take dollars away from building community broadband infrastructure. So
Say that
the
again.
first program that the 3.2 billion, those funds, we had a sense that those funds were coming to support the building of community broadband. We had a good sense that that's what was happening, and it changed within a few days to become a temporary subsidy for broadband for those that are providing it, right? So
For those who are already providing it.
So they
That's
use
right.
the 3.2 million for low income.
billion.
Sorry, 3.2 billion for low income subsidies.
So it was that 3.2 billion was going to go out to states in block grants for the building of community broadband potentially, and other, working with private providers, but to build infrastructure. And that was scuttled. That was the first round of funds that came out at the end of the Trump administration. That was scuttled and put into this temporary subsidy program, the 3.2 billion. So it will build nothing. It is not sustainable. It doesn't last forever. And now, so then we had another tranche that came through, which has funded the work that we'll see now. And we're potentially seeing another tranche coming through that's going to double down on that. And who does that benefit? I would like to believe that that is all being done for low income. It is not.
In fact, one of
Federal
the
policy.
horrible things that happened was because it's administered through the existing mechanism that's called Lifeline. Some of the carriers, and this has been addressed in the subsequent bill, some of the carriers actually required people to take certain kinds of services, high-priced services, so they can maximize the subsidy they got against the cost of that service. But, things happen. I don't think we have to spend a lot of time on it because it's gonna exist.
Yeah.
I think the real challenge is we may need to create some ways to ensure that our little CUDs can access some of that
Yes.
federal subsidy money. And the new bill is 2,077 pages, so I didn't get it all read last night. But kind of working on that, working on what I think will be a letter to Senator Leahy's office about how do we work together with that system.
Patty, I apologize. I have to leave for a legislative hearing.
Okay. Thank
I'll
you
watch
very
the
much,
public
Laura.
comments after.
Thank you very much for all your work and feedback. I'm going to propose that we have for our next meeting, we have for September 16th, we're going to invite Mikuta, Tim, and potentially friends, is to have them address the affordability issue and thoughts about how to deal with it. Let's hear from the folks on that side for affordability and low income.
I think that'd be great. I mean, there is some need to do low income. I will say this, equal access to broadband is trying to create a mechanism that other CUDs can plug into so that everyone doesn't have to recreate the wheel of how to do this. But there is a lot of interest among the CUDs of how to do low income. It is incredibly administratively intensive.
One thing I should note in the pre-construction RFP that was put out, they were asked to just give their thoughts on it. Like we listed a variety of different conditions in Act 71 and just kind of putting it out to them, like you need to start thinking about this. We want to see evidence that you've started thinking. We don't expect you to have a full plan at this point. Like that's impossible, but we want to know that you're thinking about it. So that's information we will be all viewing as we review applications.
It may be hard for them to even get the information that says how many low income families they have or where that is impactful on their network.
Well, they should certainly elaborate on any of the challenges that they face, such as that in their applications.
Yeah.
We just want to understand this better and to know they're thinking about it.
That's right. Okay. But I really, I think affordability, my personal opinion is that affordability does need to just be generally addressed in the business plan. And the system has to be sustainable and that addressing extreme need, like everybody won't find the benchmark pricing in whatever network affordable. I mean, if it's $60, if it's $50, I may not be in a household that says, yeah, I have a spare $50 I want to spend. But I think this group and Vikuda are going to have to help down the road in getting affordability education together or make proposals to the legislature about that. And the FCC is starting to work on this too, of how do you afford broadband internet service and cut costs in other places? How can you make that work? So.
Dan or Brian, do you have any comments?
Well, I think it should be the way a grant application addresses affordability should be part of the criteria we're looking at pretty hard.
Okay. Roll it into the matrix, roll it into the.
Yeah, again, I don't think we need to, I think we should provide them as much information as we can. It's not ours to solve, it's ours to help them factor into their planning.
But I do hear you saying that it's not like we're going to sit here and determine for them what affordability is in terms of a price point.
I agree.
I would hope not.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I think it's theirs to present and figure out a way around that, because they have to make the business model stand up.
And
Sorry, I agree with that. I think having a sustainable network at the very baseline to get started, and then it will evolve. If they don't get the right take rate, it won't be sustainable, and then we'll be taking on a network that we don't, it'll come back. And so that affordability, I think it's very important for a whole host of equity issues. And I think it'll evolve and improve as it starts to spin, as the flywheel goes.
so that's really a conversation about what the rate is for service, and what about the connection cost? I mean, do we have consensus in terms of affordability about, and this was among our guidelines that we are going to look to staff to create, but, I just want to be aware that it's not just a rate discussion, it's also a connection discussion.
I comment that I think that goes back to the same, each CED should make a proposal, because they're right there at the ground. And if you're talking about a trailer park, they should be working with a landlord and gaining access to the conduits and building their infrastructure, which stays in the facility, but is repeatably usable for that CED or an apartment building or what have you. But creating those arrangements and then addressing that in their response. That's just my comment.
Okay, any other comments? So we have 15 minutes before the public input. Do we have time to do the website?
Why don't we just punt on the website right now? I'm not going to have time to work on it in the next few weeks.
Okay.
And this might be something that we
Can you just give an update of what website with this?
So we do have a domain now. It's not active. It's still in draft form. That's bcbb@vermont.gov. Our current website is still on the Public Service Department website, and it just contains the list of board members, contact information, just email for all the board members, the minutes, the agendas, the board materials, and then just a list of links like the RFP is posted there. What I'm envisioning for our larger website is to have all the information about the CUDs, potentially even have a page for each CUD, to have all the materials all the public materials that we're collecting to allow for greater transparency.
Is it not possible to do that through the DPS website spots that we're occupying now? Because I view having that transparency and access to public information high value, us having a separate website low value if we can accomplish it through the DPS location. You know what I mean?
We would have to talk with the Public Service Department whether we can have a separate section where we can break out different menu items as opposed to just a single page that's linked. There's the whole question and the concern of wanting to make sure that there is that barrier.
Okay.
That's evident, and I think that's a question for the Public Service Department too.
Okay.
Either way, we're still within the state framework of what the site needs to look like. So it's not, either way, it involves building content and linking content and figuring out how it's set up there. So it's not like one project is 100 hours, another project is 10 hours, unfortunately.
All right, any other questions on website comments? All right, we are a little early, but let's move to, before we move to public input, is there anything from the executive director that you want to highlight?
No, I think
Just make sure you have ample time because we have a few extra minutes. Let's move to public input. And hopefully nobody is signing on at 12:15 to give public input.
We'll probably still be going till then.
So we'll allocate 3 minutes per speaker. In the event somebody, if we have sufficient time because we're early, we'll come back around and give more time if folks would like to have more time. And I'm going to suggest, Tim, that we wait till the end for you.
My name is Will.
I'm sorry.
It's quite all right. Yes, I think that's good. If there's anyone else from the CUDs that'd like to speak first, I think that would probably be best.
Yeah, Tim is the other gentleman.
Oh, I'm
so
sorry. I'm sorry. I got you guys mixed up.
Let's go here first and then.
So I guess if there's anybody online, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you and put you on video. Anybody? Okay, Krista. And 1 second, Krista. Can you actually? Krista, can you unmute yourself and unvideo, or is that something I'm going to have to change in settings again?
He just unmuted. Yeah.
I got
Okay,
it.
there you go. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't know. Yeah. Okay, are we all set? You can hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. So I guess responding to a couple of the questions that you were looking for input on or things that were discussed today. One of them was around, phasing and what is responsible. And so I just wanted to provide a quick comment on that. There's no doubt in our mind that construction needs to be phased, and you have to really look at that in a phased manner, and that is the only way to do that responsibly. But the design is different. The design informs when you have an area that's as large as the Northeast Kingdom, and I think that this is true for most of the CUDs. You have to take your whole design into consideration in order to understand certain portions of it. Where are you going to put things? How are things going to interact? You have to understand what you have in front of you as an overall, so that you can go out and, we're going to do a field collection piece, right, as part of our detailed design process, and that helps us understand where are the areas that have a lot of make ready because somebody hasn't done their maintenance, or where are the areas that are great because they're solely owned or they're easy to do, and that informs it, and that's connected to the whole territory. The other piece is that, we're looking at 25% of our project being funded with grant funds, which means the remainder has to be done through finances. And when we look at finances and we look at what does that time frame take, it takes a good deal of time in order to do that. So if you want to get a very thorough business plan versus the high-level business plans that we're starting with, if you really want to go in and understand what do you have to do, how are you going to do it, and how are you going to bring this to the bond market, and what are the thresholds that you have to meet in order to get there, and how are you going to get there with the different parts of your CUD district, then you have to be able to understand that whole picture and that whole design. So we feel pretty strongly that, yes, we will have our entire design done within the 18 months. Yes, we do understand that there are portions of it that will have to be refreshed if, in a couple of years things have changed or been modified. But those locations that are out on the edges that are the unserved, pretty sure they're still going to be unserved in a couple of years, and that, Consolidated or others aren't going to step up beyond what obligations they've already committed themselves to over the next 10 months. So that's the piece on that. In terms of the June 1st question, I think we can provide additional comments on that, but I'll leave that. And I think there was a third one, but I don't have it in my notes right here. It must be on my online notes. So I think that's all I have right now.
Thank you, Krista.
You're welcome.
Okay, next up, it looks like it's Kristen. Let me spotlight you. You can unmute yourself and I will take you off.
Can you state who you're representing, just so we have that clear?
Krista was with NEK Broadband. And Kristen's with NEK Broadband. Oh, you're muted, Kristen.
So Krista is our interim executive director at NEK Broadband. I'm the vice chair of NEK Broadband and also the vice chair of VCUDA. And I know that Will is going to bring a lot of items to the table, but since Krista wasn't able to address the June 1st question, I would say that I can speak both from an NEK Broadband perspective and a VCUDA perspective that, you know, if we need to go in and make some legislative word changes in the new session, we can do that. But our understanding of intent, and I assume everyone's hope, is that towns will continue to join the CUDs. And if we don't update the date that you're considering, you know, the number of addresses unserved, if that is the primary metric by which you are distributing funds, if we can't update that as I understand you need a date when you're starting a round of funding. You need a date so you can distribute things, but that needs to be updated for each round, or else you're basically asking CUDs to accept members that they won't get any funding to serve. So, you know, we need to work together, VCUDA and your board, to figure out if if we need to request legislative changes. I think personally, I think it's clear that the June 1st deadline was intended to be towns that can't leave a CUD at that point, not that towns can't join a CUD at that point. But in any case, that's my primary comment.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else online?
All right, given that we, at this point, we have plenty of time. So what I'd like to do is turn it to Tim and Will. Rob, I'm going to let you tee this up, but we can give you more time because we have sufficient time with which to give you. So let's start with 6 minutes each, if needed.
Sounds good to me.
All right, Tim, would you like to go first?
Yeah, and these are relatively random thoughts about points that came up during the discussion. And I'd like to talk.
Tim, just state for the record who you're representing.
Tim Nolte, I'm the CEO of Mastio Community Fiber.
Thank you.
And I used to be the CEO of East Central Vermont Fiber. And before that, I was the CEO of Burlington Telecom. And I have a long checkered history way back beyond that you don't want to hear about. Well, you might, I don't know. On the overbuild question, we're getting a lot of approaches from small communities in areas that are served by somebody else, Comcast, Consolidated. So consider an area, typically it's Comcast, like that. And there are a bunch of donut holes, unserved, within this. And we have a policy, we will not build or compete with Comcast. And that's not ideological. We're a small local company doing this with our own money. I have $1 million of my own money in it. And we are simply not in a position to poke the dragon in his lair. So here we are. I'm here. Now, overbuild is not really about building the whole thing. In reality, for somebody like us, overbuild is how do we get a single line from our territory to theirs. If this is a single line, and we can theoretically do it with one single fiber, We could in fact do it with one lambda on a single fiber. A lambda is a particular color. But one single line will do. They don't make quality, cables with one. So we'd be having something like 6. That is very cheap. A single line down there, not serving anybody here, let alone here. Just one single line like that. Very cheap.
No drops along the way, right?
No drops along the way. If you have to do drops, it's a completely different undertaking. Furthermore, if the shortest way is on a major a road, Route 15. So we could go down to here, along here, and be there. That's the shortest way, let's say. That's not the cheapest usually, because it's very expensive to build on major thoroughfare. It might very well be cheaper to go like this on small roads. In fact, frequently is. Because there's hardly any make ready, there's nobody on those poles, you just string along and go. That is not overbuilding, not in any meaningful way. That's the real question. The point that Ms. Sibilia brought up about, overbuilding writ large is not really on the table. That's on the table. Can we run a line, a single line, typically with 6 fibers in it, down to a point of presence here, from which we can serve that? That's really the question. It's cheap, relatively speaking, but for us, who have to, as a husband our pennies very carefully, cheap ain't cheap. My mother used to say, I come from a very low-income family originally, and while I was had to go shopping with my mom, and I'd say, well, this high, and I was out of fishing hooks. This actually happened. I was out of fish hooks. Mom, I need some fish hooks. And there's a package on the head. It's only a quarter for 20 fish hooks. Mom, can't we spend it? And she said, Tim, how much have you got from your allowance? And so my allowance was $0.10 a week. That was my allowance. Got $0.10. She said, Timothy, a quarter ain't cheap if you only got $0.10. And she didn't buy it. So that's my hometown is Lunenburg in the Northeast Kingdom. Yeah.
Tim, can I just, so the way, based on what you're saying, the way we should look at this concept of overbuild is if it's getting from one location to a point of presence, no drops along the way, 6-strand or some smaller than you'd never build 6-strand to do retail service.
Exactly.
Then even if it winds along some back roads where there is existing infrastructure, as long as it's not creating,
you're not stopping.
It's not creating drops along the way. That your recommendation would be don't really look at that as overbuild.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And the distinction is huge.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you have to have been in the business a long time to understand that distinction. Building a network that serves everybody along the line,
right,
and building a network that just goes down the road is orders of magnitude.
Right, but in that scenario, you still will need, if space needs to be created on the pole for your 6 strands, that's still a reality, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, but usually on these back roads, it's not a problem.
Yeah, got it.
And I would say 60% or 80% of back roads need no make ready at all.
Okay.
Our builds typically are no more than 60% of the builds need any make ready, and usually is 60% don't need any.
And in your diagram, you described it that back road route, albeit longer, is cheaper because there isn't any make ready, right?
Right.
Okay. And that the shorter route is presumably congested, and that's why you.
Yeah, because you're going down Route 15, there's 17 things on there. There's going to be a lot of movement. A lot of poles will have to be replaced.
You're making a smart business.
Let alone building in a town. That's a fortune.
Is that a short-term, long-term differential though, because you're gonna have many more feet of maintenance in the meandering route.
Maintenance is a small problem.
Okay,
If you build a decent network and it's fiber, maintenance was a much bigger deal with copper, because copper deteriorates. Fiber doesn't. There's fiber up in the United States that was put up in 1955 and still there and working.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, not very good fiber, I understand, but it's still there because glass is one of the most durable what was the last time you saw a pane of glass put in 1755 that had anything wrong with it at all?
well, actually, you don't want to go there.
Well, there's the wiggles because they didn't make glass very well, but the glass didn't deteriorate.
So will you also be looking at off-road versus on-road? So I work at Washington Electric Co-op. So we have 50% of our lines. Let me finish this thought. 50% of our lines are off-road, not roadside, through the hills, through the
very
valley,
good point.
like super rural. And it's very cheap to put a line up. It is super expensive to maintain it because it's off-road.
If you use 10,000 pounds strands, okay, even that isn't very hard. I mean, nothing breaks that stuff. I've seen that stuff stop a truck that was going down the road with something a little too high, hit a cross that was a little too low, and it was going 30 miles an hour, and it was stopped by the strand.
And usually the electric lines stop it before it gets to the fiber.
Yeah, exactly, because the electric lines are on the top.
So you have a problem, but not the telecom.
It's actually, because it's more expensive to put it up, people have to go out there in little 4x4s and climb the pole. That's a serious issue. But it isn't too hard if you're looking to find a route that doesn't have off-road stuff or has very little and doesn't have any make ready. Yeah. But we are getting a lot of these calls in our territories. And we're saying, look, we're happy to serve you. We'll even take the chance that Comcast will get mad at us and come in and fill it. But we need some help with this. And I'm just saying, if you get those kind of calls, be sympathetic.
That's very helpful.
9 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tim. We're going to turn it over to Will.
All right, thank you.
If you can just say your name and who you're
Yeah, of
representing.
course. I'll
Just for the
briefly
record.
introduce myself as well, just for everyone online. My name is Will Anderson, and as of yesterday, I'm the first full-time employee of VCUDA, which is the Vermont CUD Association. And I've been charged by the board generally with administration and policy side issues for the association, and thus all 9 of the CUDs. And a big part of that is expected to be interacting with all of you at the Community Broadband Board. And I'll just try to address a couple of points about that, and certainly expand on them more when I am ideally at the table for the meeting next week on the 16th. Next week? Yes. So the key issue that we want to figure out as VCUDA right now is what kind of relationship we can have with this board, how we can interact, and how we can feedback on policy recommendations. This has been something that we found pretty nebulous so far. We have requested that there, be a procedure established for how we can receive your proposals and how we can influence your decisions, because we believe that as the board is designated to monitor the CUDs should at least have a prominent seat at the table and influence in those decisions. Can I please
clarify? Are you asking for a seat at this VCBB?
I think that this is something I'd like to continue to discuss at our meeting on Monday. Of course, on Thursday the 16th, we're slated to have a discussion about the relationship between our association and the CUDs and this board. But that isn't something that I, am formally requesting right now. I'll certainly continue to attend VCBB meetings, as this is monitoring this organization and its decisions are a part of my job. But just to talk a little bit about, this question that's been posed about what's the role of VCUDA going forward. We are working on shared services for financial controls. We are working on building a consensus on the affordability issue, which we're taking into account many of the points that Holly has brought forward, and working to bring together a lot of different approaches that each CUD has. Frankly, each CUD kind of has a different approach at this point. So we're working on building our best practices for that. And we're even starting to explore bulk purchasing and how that can figure into each CUD, benefiting each CUD going forward. And of course, all of these things are issues that we'd like to discuss with the board as they make decisions, as you make decisions about what these grants are going to look like. So for September 16th, and I'm interacting with Rob and Christine, and we'll hopefully discuss, the agenda for that meeting. Would like to go through a lot of these points, and number one priority would be to establish a procedure with which VCUDA and all the CUDs can receive proposals from the VCBB ahead of time, and then a procedure for which we can make recommendations and have at least some part in the discussion about how your decisions are made about these grants and about this funding going forward. That's what the perspective of the organization has been, and that's the role that I'm going to be taking on. So thank you very much for letting me speak, and I look forward to talking with you all on September 16th. And of course, I'm going to be sending out my contact information to all of you as well. And I really hope that I can be a resource and a liaison between all of you and the CUDs. If you have questions about where the CUDs are at as a group or individually, please come to me, and I can make the connections or provide those answers myself. Holly, please.
Two things.
Yes.
Evidently, Rob has sent out, we're trying to get a dashboard of where all the CUDs are at. So you could make one, but the fact of the matter is Rob has sent out a questionnaire, and if you could facilitate the collection of that information for us, it's really hard to keep a snapshot in mind of where we're at, and it's so informative to understand who's on first, so to speak. That'd be really helpful. The second thing is, with regard to a procedure, you've got a very interesting organization, Will Anderson. So it's volunteers, it meets regularly, people are putting tons of time into it. Maybe it would be useful as you understand the dynamics of that group that you propose to us what kind of procedures work well for feedback, because it's a push me, pull you between time and results, and your time for input is what I mean, and getting results. So that's the challenge.
No, both very good points, Holly. I'll take the second one first. I do anticipate to come on September 16th with a proposal from VCUDA on what our ideal relationship would be in terms of policy and approval, and to discuss from there to that point. As for the first one, I do hope to work with Rob, and especially in our meeting on Monday, and I'm attending meetings with the individual CUDs, facilitate a compendium of information about the CUDs where each of them are at on all these benchmarks. And additionally to that, I intend to become a human version of that and resource for each of the CUDs. And like I mentioned, I'll be meeting with all of them individually. I've been working with the CUDs for the past years, and I think I'll get pretty quickly up to speed on where everyone is at on each individual issue, and continue to stay abreast of that. And like I said, one of my main roles here is to be a liaison between VCUDA and the board, and I hope that me taking on this role full time will help that relationship grow and serve as a resource to you. Any other questions? Because that's basically all I have for now. I'm just looking forward to bringing a lot of these issues to the table with some VCUDA decisions on the 16th.
One question that I'd ask you to address on the 16th that would
Yes.
be really helpful for me is what is the relationship with VCUDA in each of the individual CUDs, in the sense of, if you come to a meeting and represent a policy position, does that automatically transfer to all the CUDs? Or are we going to hear from the CUDs independently that might have a different perspective?
Right.
So help with that.
Sure. I definitely I can bring some consensus to the table on the 16th, but VCUDA represents all 9 CUDs, and in my role as of now, I will be representing the organization and thus all of the CUDs. Part of the reason we.
So the thing I would want you to address on the 16th, not right now, are policy positions. So just get into a little bit more about what that means, because the worst thing we could do is think, you know, Vicuda represents and we go down a certain path and then we hear from individual CUDs on the side saying, well, that worked for the group, but I've got a unique situation. So I just want to, if you can address that on the 16th.
Well, yes, I mean, just to say briefly now, part of the reason why we want notice and we want procedure or we want time to address these issues is that we can meet and build a consensus. Because it's true that with all 9 CUDs, many in different states of development, it's not going to be the same decision right away on every issue that I can, you know, sit here and expound upon. We need time to meet, we need time to discuss, so that we can build that consensus that I can bring. But much further on this, of course.
And I'll have that survey out later today or tomorrow.
Right, Rob, I'll be in touch about that and we can make sure that it's all very timely. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you, Will.
Do you have a few minutes for one other point?
I think we had a question. We had a question appear online. I don't know if
Okay, go back to.
Irv, are you still interested in giving comment? Please raise your hand again, or I'm just gonna spotlight you in. Hope that you are. She did raise your hand several times. So Irv, if you want to make a comment, please, there we go. Please unmute yourself and put yourself on video and go for it.
State name and who you represent, please.
This is Irv Tomei, a former chair of the EC Fiber Governing Board. I just wanted to comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to comment in support of Tim Nolte's comments that the actual phrasing in Act 71 bears directly on his point. This is on page 19 of, I'm looking at the final report of the Legislative Conference Committee. Any overbuild is incidental to the overall objectives of the Universal Service Plan required for funding under this program. I'm quite familiar with that language because, frankly, I helped craft it. And exactly for the reasons that Tim has mentioned.
Thank you very much.
Irv, good to see you. Oh, I didn't see you, but good to hear from you.
Okay,
Thank you.
we have 1 minute. Is it a brief comment?
It might not be a minute, but it would be less than 5 minutes. Your call.
Can people stay for a few more minutes?
We want to make sure we have not discussed the overarching design standards in the workshop next week, and I think it's important that we touch on that.
So design standards, we punted. That got
Yeah,
moved.
that's on the next.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't think.
That got moved. And what was the other one?
That was the one that I was,
Yeah.
so we have the workshop next Wednesday open to potential applicants.
Okay, I do want to hear about the workshop so can you?
This is Christine.
Yeah, this workshop is, so you've got a set of overarching design standards. We're, that's been floated out to the CUDs, but what we want to, next 15th session is to hear from the CUDs what their expectations are in terms of design standards and the telecom providers. So we want to develop a set of common standards. We've got a set of proposed standards, and we're looking for feedback. We're looking for a series of design meetings. The first meeting is to hear from the CUDs and the telecom providers, what they believe the standards should be. Well, we're going to come back with a design standard. My expectation is we as a board will come back with a set of approved design standards. Okay. But we're not ready to present that to you yet.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to look at any proposed design standards that we have not received exhaustive feedback.
Right, exactly. And I think a third party, we also should have, the part of our, is get a third party engineer to come to the board with recommendations. This is really the beginning.
So while you're calling it a workshop, it's not that you're training somebody, it's that you're looking for feedback.
Yep.
So listening session may have been away from people who may be applying for funds and building and operating these networks. Good.
When is the date?
15th.
Thank you. Next Wednesday.
Do those design standards, yes, of course they do, they affect the pre-construction grants
Yeah, they need to be built into the detailed design, so so timing will be important. And we're, as soon as I find out tomorrow, we in the budget, there's $100,000 for engineering advisory services. And that's really one of the primary functions to give us advisory.
So this is another item in the nature of building the plane while we fly it, right?
Right, yeah.
Because here we're going to do grant standards, but we don't have this piece, and
That's right.
we're going to get some applications. Okay.
So will you be ready for the 16th to update us on that workshop?
Yes. Yep.
So you'll be effectively updating us on what the design standard proposal is?
No.
16th? Not yet.
No.
Just an overview of the feedback.
Yeah, high level.
You have received the
Yeah, we've seen
proposed
it.
standards, but they're proposed, not, a lot of work needs to be done on those before we even bring them to the board for formal approval.
In the interest of time, because I would like to check in with you right after this meeting, and I have to get back to the office for a WEC meeting, I would like to call our meeting now. Tim, if you have something after we adjourn, then you can talk with individuals, but I would like to the three of us to huddle up.
Okay.
Okay. So unless there's any other business,
Motion to adjourn?
thank you. A second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Meeting adjourned. Thank you all. We will see you next week on the 16th at 9.